Chapter 408. Caressing the stone of the necromancer in his hand, Buffett snorted in dissatisfaction, venting the anger in his heart. There's only this kind of reward. After defeating the Megalosaurus army, the beast monarch immediately entered the creation experiment that originally belonged to the tyrant worm. With his strength, he naturally cleared most of the areas easily and received the reward, the stone of the necromancer. As long as one held this magical item made by a legendary necromancer, even an ordinary mortal would be able to control the will of most of the dead and command countless undead creatures. But to a demon lord, this reward was of little value and was even suspected of insulting a demon lord. Did they lack subordinates? Or could it be that those undead creatures were more powerful than the demon lord's Tana-Re army? Obviously, this was impossible. Therefore, Buffett was very dissatisfied with this and thought that he was targeted by Stim. The first time, you let go of the weak red dragon. The second time, you rewarded me with this broken thing. Buffett, who was covered in a black mane, narrowed his blood-red eyes. Well, when this game is over, we must have a good talk and discuss the etiquette to treat the strong. Thinking of this, although there was still a part of the creation laboratory that had not been cleared in time, he did not want to wait any longer. Those places were all the forbidden territories of the tyrant worm, and clearing them was dangerous and troublesome. Now, Buffett was just an incarnation of the demon lord. He would not be so arrogant as to think that he was invincible. Moreover, since he received the stone of the necromancer, he did not want to keep this reward, so he might as well use it immediately. Anyway, the game had become a little boring for him, so using the magical item as a reward to speed up the progress was a good idea. Give me an item. Buffett's mouth suddenly curled up and communicated with the exchange list that Stim issued to him. Well, I want the Great Graveyard of Dorison. Ding. Exchange for Great Graveyard of Dorison requires all the gold coins currently accumulated by the player. Please be sure to confirm carefully. Of course, the beast monarch chose to confirm again. At the same time, he felt a little curious and gloating, as everyone knew, in the bottomless abyss, the Knoll King Yeenagoo and the Tauren King Buffett were mortal enemies. Dorison was Yeenagoo's most important ally at the moment. Not long ago, the unlucky Ghoul King was forced to leave Orcus, one of the three leaders of the Abyss, and turned to the relatively weak Yeenagoo for protection. And now, because of Buffett's evil intentions, the King of Ghouls had to bear another painful memory. Who dares to steal my great necropolis? On the 421st floor of the Abyss, in the palace of the Pale Kingdom, Dorison roared loudly while sitting on his throne. Just a moment ago, one of his 23 great tombs had vanished without a trace. One had to know that the great necropolis was an important part of his strength. It was used to produce powerful abyssal ghouls. As a result, Dorison had set up layers upon layers of deadly defenses around the necropolis. However, against a god who could access the domain of crafty approach and theft, his defenses were still rather weak. But then again, which god only needed a great necropolis? Even if it was a god in the domain of death, would they, who controlled death, covet a few corpses of Dorison? Stim was naturally the same. He had no interest in Dorison's great necropolis at all. It was just that the players had paid a huge amount of gold coins. As the god of virtual games, he had to satisfy the players' exchange needs. Of course, it was not easy to steal from a demon lord, even if it was an extremely weak one. It took a full 5 days for Dorison's great necropolis to be moved into the Acid Fog Canyon plain and placed in front of Buffett. Ding! Dorison's great necropolis has been successfully exchanged. Please check. The system notification rang out beside the beast monarch's ears. To a demon, a mere few days was like a fleeting moment. It was not worth mentioning at all. He was sitting on the giant bull demon Ponators, checking on the recovery of his mount's injuries. Ponators had regained his fighting strength, and Dorison's great necropolis had been successfully exchanged. These two pieces of good news added to Buffett's mood. Humph, this is more or less the same. He took out the stone of the necromancer. As early as the beast monarch had come into contact with this magical item, he had already understood how to use it. As he had battled with many strong undead creatures, he knew even more about the tricks of the necromancers than the exchange instructions. He held the stone of the necromancer in one hand. With a slight squeeze, cracks appeared on the outer shell of this magical item. A stream of water with abundant negative energy gushed out of his nose and washed over the stone of the necromancer. Due to the similarity, the damaged outer shell of this magical item was peeled off little by little and dissolved into the stream of water. It was then washed away. Runes with magical aura appeared in Buffett's palm. Just as they were about to dissipate, they were stopped by a spell. These magical runes were the core secrets of the legendary necromancers to control the undead creatures. It was very troublesome to analyze them, but Buffett didn't need to do so. Just like how one didn't need to know how to program to use software, he only wanted to use the runes hidden in the stone of the necromancer to summon the undead creatures in the great necropolis more quickly. Putting his hands together and lowering his head, Buffett described his orders in detail to the magical runes in his palms. This should be enough. The magical runes turned into a green drizzle, sprinkled by the beast monarch towards the great necropolis in front of him. Feeling the call from the stone of the necromancer, they knew that the peace of the great necropolis had been broken. They, who had always been hungry, were tempted by the instinct to gnaw on flesh and blood. With their legs that used to be mortal, they bent their backs and ran. That kind of desire was so intense that they even lowered their heads between their bent legs and directly rushed forward. Their long tongues hung between their fangs, and dirty saliva flowed down along their chins and neck. Their arms hung low, their joints dragging on the ground, and their fingers twitched excitedly, but they didn't care at all, because they were ghouls, and hungry ghouls were easier to enslave. It's time to end this game. Buffett stood up from the colossal bull demon's back. He used a rare soft voice to softly mutter an incantation. The ghouls that rushed out of the great necropolis heard the summoner's invitation and pointed out the location of the feast of flesh and blood. The following content is not counted in the word count. Thanks to Shoutang 246, Amir Regis, and Fish in Troubled Waters for their tip. The support of the readers is the source of motivation for the new author to continue to update. Chapter 409. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The blacksmiths in the blood-armored demon army worked hard to hammer the steel that had just come out of the furnace. As they hammered, their assistants added additional materials to the steel to increase its sturdiness and toughness. As they worked step by step, the steel gradually showed the embryonic form of a weapon. It began to look like a war hammer. The head of the hammer was in the shape of a ferocious dragon's head, and the handle of the hammer had anti-slip threads. Chi, the final shape of the war hammer was placed in the coolant. The white dragon's blood that floated in the ice quickly dissipated the residual heat on the weapon. As Daramar had cast a spell on the steel before forging the warhammer now displayed an astonishing vitality. The dragon-head warhammer began to twist. While the blood-armored demon blacksmith was inspecting his work, it suddenly exploded. The ferocious dragon's head bit the blood-armored demon's neck fiercely. With force from the upper and lower jaws, it clamped the blood-armored demon's throat and separated his head from his body. Before he could even let out a wail, the blacksmith died in the mouth of his work. He was destined to not be able to rest in peace. Seeing his superior die, the blacksmith assistant, who was also a blood-armored demon, ran away. He only wanted to leave this place as far as possible. After all, countless maggots would emerge after the death of the blood-armored demon. These maggots would attack the surrounding creatures indiscriminately. Get lost. Daramar, who was standing at the door of the workshop, pushed away the blacksmith assistant who rushed out and walked straight in. At this moment, as his life essence had evolved into a 9-headed demon dragon, his humanoid form had also changed greatly. He originally appeared as a dragon vein goblin, but now he had become a dragon vein earth goblin. His body was as strong as an orc's. The heart of the Baylor demon beat vigorously, covering Daramar with a shield made of abyss evil fire. The rotting maggots drilled out of the blood-armored demon blacksmith's body. As soon as they met the flames on Daramar's body, they immediately turned into ashes. Daramar strode forward and kicked away the corpse that was constantly spewing maggot. He bent down and grabbed the handle of the hammer. The dragon head war hammer that wanted to bite his hand was like a snake that was pinched by its weak point. It instantly became docile. It seems not bad. After swinging his warhammer a few times, Daramar could not help but sigh. In a good mood, he even generously threw a bunch of evil abyss fire into the corpse of the blood-armored demon blacksmith, granting it eternal rest. With a suitable weapon, the 9-headed demon dragon Dharma's strength increased greatly. He began to consider whether or not he should send out his troops to seize the new general flag. However, sometimes plans could not keep up with changes. Before he could gather his troops and set off, the enemy had arrived at the walls of the burnt sacrifice fortress before him. The lookout on the fortress was the first to discover the enemy. Then, that devil used purgatory language to loudly warn the entire city. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! All the blood-armored demons were running around to spread the news. Although it seemed disorderly, it was actually very orderly. Every blood-armored demon rushed to their assigned positions as soon as possible. They were not panicking at all. They had long since become accustomed to battles. In the days when they fought against the Thanner Re-demons, the blood-armored demons had not only experienced hundreds of battles, but they had also seen countless grand scenes. When enemies came to attack the fortress, the blood-armored demons would not pay attention to whether the enemy was aggressive or if their side was weak. They only cared about how many cavalrymen and infantry, how many archers and spearmen, how many weaponsmiths, cannoneers, plundering light cavalry, and tunnel engineers the enemy had. Knowing all these, the blood-armored demons could easily estimate how much effort they would need to spend to win this battle. It's just a group of ghouls, and you're shouting? Standing on the city wall, the blood-armored demon guard captain looked at the lookout in surprise. However, he knew that his subordinate was not a novice. This one is from the 9 prisons of Bader. I really saw it. Behind these ghouls, there is a huge giant bull demon. The lookout explained helplessly. His eyes that could see through invisibility had indeed caught a glimpse of a powerful Thanner Re-demon, but now there was no trace of it. Let's not worry about that for now. First, we need to clean up those ghouls. With so many undead creatures gathered, there must be someone commanding them. The blood-armored demon guard captain waved his hand and immediately gave his order. Then, he teleported away from the city wall. Sitting on the throne that originally belonged to the burnt-offering demon, Daramar listened to the information brought back by the blood-armored demon guard captain. A huge giant bull demon. The 9-headed demon dragon squinted his eyes slightly. It's very likely that the existence suspected to be the demon lord has brought his subordinates here. As for those ghouls, I'm afraid it's also his doing. Although he could not be sure, he knew that he could not be careless in the face of a suspected demon lord's attack. Send out the demon hound army, Daramar ordered. There is also a lot of meat on the ghouls. It can satisfy the demon hound's appetite. Due to the burnt-offering demon's previous management, this fortress stored a lot of military equipment. There were more than 30 Hellscream alone. However, Daramar did not want to waste these ammunition. In comparison, it was more practical to send the demon hound army to battle. As the order was passed down, the gate of the doghouse in the fortress was opened again. Hungry demon hounds swarmed out. Under the blood-armored demons berating and chasing, these demon hounds from the 9 prisons of Bader charged towards the city wall while salivating. There was no need to open the iron gate of the fortress. When building and repairing the city wall, the burnt-offering demon had specially ordered the craftsmen to leave several dog holes. With just a bit of magic power, the mechanism blocking the dog holes would be moved aside, allowing the demon hounds to pass through with their heads lowered. Even though the ghouls were undead creatures that emitted an indescribable stench, the demon hounds still salivated when they saw them. In the past few days, Daramar had no choice but to reduce the expenditure of the fortress in order to accumulate gold coins to exchange for the materials needed to forge the dragon head warhammer. The demon hound army bore the brunt of this. Their daily ration had shrunk to a third of the original. They could no longer eat as heartily as before. No matter how small a mosquito's leg was, it still had a piece of meat. Not to mention the ghouls that were not much smaller than normal humans. Rotten meat was still meat. It was better than no meat at all. At the same time, the abyss ghouls that crawled out of the great necropolis actually had the same idea as the demon hounds. Furthermore, their hunger was even stronger than the demon hounds. After all, these undead creatures were cursed for eternity. Even if they were already dead, they would still suffer from the constant torment of hunger until one day they would turn into ashes. Thus, a rather comical scene appeared. Obviously, these two evil creatures had sharp claws and stood on 2 feet when fighting. But when they clashed, whether it was the demon hounds or the ghouls, their first choice was to open their big mouths. Chapter 4:10. Abyss ghouls could also be called demonic ghosts. Compared to ordinary ghouls, these ghouls that were soaked in the power of the abyss were stronger, faster, and more cunning. Therefore, although the Ghoul Legion's individual strength was insufficient against the hounds from Bateau, they were evenly matched in terms of numbers. At the very least, when the hounds gnawed on the ghouls' rotting flesh, there were also demonic hounds that were eaten by the ghouls. Those undead bastards! There are quite a lot of them. Standing on the walls of the demon fortress, Daramar said to the blood-armored demon garrison captain beside him, and the latter only nodded. This was not disrespect to the commander, but when the blood-armored demons were faced with war, they would become especially focused. However, Daramar still felt like a thorn in his heart. The blood-armored demons' actions reminded him that these Batsu were only obedient to authority. Without the general flag, or after the game ends, these devils might turn against us. I have to prepare in advance, Daramar thought to himself. Of course, he did not say this out loud, especially when the fortress was under attack and he still had to rely on the blood-armored demons to defend. Just as he was thinking, in the battlefield not far away, the situation of the two sides suddenly changed. The ghouls that were originally loosely resisting the demonic Hound Legion seemed to have received some order and quickly left the battle. However, they were not retreating, but rather, they began to gather into groups with some particularly powerful demonic ghosts as the center. In each group, there were some abyss ghouls that were far larger than their peers, as if they were transformed from giants. They surrounded their leader, who was the most powerful and the wisest among them, and guarded him firmly in the center. Compared to these undead creatures that suddenly became orderly, the demonic Hound Legion on the battlefield seemed even more chaotic. Seeing this situation, the blood-armored demon garrison captain standing behind Daramar immediately advised, "Let the demonic hounds retreat, and then let the blood-armored demons replace the hounds?" Daramar interrupted the blood-armored demon garrison captain with a rhetorical question, but he did not mention the use of military equipment. Just a moment ago, this narrow-minded 9-headed demon dragon had classified the Batsu Legion under his command as consumables. Weapons like Hellscream, on the other hand, were completely different. They were assets that he could take away and save for future use. I've never heard of the 9 prisons of Bader advocating compassion. The sarcasm in Daramar's words was obvious. This made the blood-armored demons, who had always been proud of Bader, feel extremely disgusted. If they were not restricted by the general flag, they might have already raised their weapons. However, he continued, military orders are absolute. The ghouls are the enemy of the demon hounds. Those demon hounds must learn to face them on their own. The blood-armored demon guard captain naturally disagreed with such an explanation. When the burnt-offering demon commanded the legion of devils, if the enemy had the advantage in numbers, he would definitely use Hellscream to wipe them out first. Because it would be easier to win that way, the consumption of resources was not worth mentioning in front of the glory of victory. In Bader's social system, there was no such thing as failure is the mother of success. Only by constantly winning could the demons be promoted, and the consumption of resources would be prioritized. However, the blood-armored demon guard captain still chose to follow Daramar's orders due to his nature of obeying the commander's decision. But when he carried out his orders, he still made some suggestions on tactics. This time, Daramar gladly accepted them. "Lord Commander," the blood-armored demon guard captain said, "we need to provide the demon hounds with some cardiac stimulants." The so-called cardiac stimulant was actually a special stimulant of Bador. It could temporarily raise the strength of the troop. Its core formula was top secret, and it was filled with rare materials such as the liver of a Kiru demon, the blood of a pit fiend, and so on. The method of using the cardiac stimulant was very simple. It could be taken orally or applied externally. Both options were acceptable. With Daramar's approval, the blood-armored demon guard captain ordered people to take out a portion of the cardiac stimulant shells from the warehouse. He then used Hellscream to bombard the battlefield. This drug could only make the Batsu people more excited. To the other races, especially the Tana Re-demons, this cardiac stimulant was no different from poison. This was the reason why Daramar was not stingy with the use of cardiac stimulants on the demon hounds. Bang, 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 the Hellscream that had been silent for a long time finally roared again. Of course, it did not last for long. After firing a dozen or so cardiac stimulant shells, these great weapons of the Legion of Devils were forbidden from being fired by the commander who was distressed for his troops. However, this was enough. The cardiac stimulant shells were shot out from the barrels, and before they hit the ground, the firing pins inside caused an explosion in the air. Clouds of light red potion mist instantly enveloped the entire battlefield, covering the entire Hound Demon Legion, but there was still some left. The potion that contained some of Bader's power of order stimulated the nerves of the demon hounds, and made the ghouls feel even more uncomfortable. Although they were not like the Tana Re-demons, where coming into contact with the potion was like coming into contact with poison, these abyssal ghouls more or less contained some chaotic abyssal power in their bodies. At this moment, the rotten flesh on their bodies began to swell and fester, and pus flowed out. Fortunately, they were undead creatures, and the only thing they could feel was hunger. Otherwise, their combat strength would have been greatly reduced. Roar! The strongest ghouls in the formation raised their necks and roared, urging their subordinates to advance in a line. The demon hounds seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. Under the pumping of their thumping hearts, their blood began to surge to their heads. Facing the dense formation of ghouls, the demon hounds chose to use a wedge-shaped formation to launch a decapitation attack. Like a hot knife through butter, the demon hounds tore through the dense formation of ghouls and pounced directly at the center. At this moment, their brains blocked out the perception of pain and hunger. Not only did the demon hounds not feel the pain of their bodies being injured, they also did not stop to nibble on food. They wanted to directly attack the root of the problem, and establish their victory by killing the ghoul leaders. However, although the idea was good, it was very difficult to implement. How could the ghoul leaders under the command of the demon lord not be prepared for the enemy's decapitation attack? With bursts of ghastly roars, the ghouls that were originally scattered into several formations quickly gathered together. Like making dumplings, the demon hounds were like the filling of dumplings, surrounded by the ghouls and attacked from both sides. Chapter 4:11. Panicked like stray dogs was the most appropriate way to describe the current state of the demon hound army. Of course, that was if they were still an army. After being surrounded by the abyss ghouls, the demon hounds from Bader were like dogs that had been locked up and beaten. Even though the demon hound's strength had increased due to the effects of the cardiac stimulant, they were still almost completely wiped out in the end. Originally, the burnt offering devil beast raised a few hundred devil hounds, but after escaping from the ghoul formation, less than a tenth of them survived, and all of them were injured. The demon hounds ran in the direction of the devil's fortress while barking madly. If translated into the purgatory language, these words could almost include some of the words that would be raped by the Bartholomew 9 hells. They were asking questions. They were asking why the commander allowed them to die in the formation, why he didn't send any reinforcements, why he didn't send any artillery support. However, these questions were destined to be fruitless. "Raise your crossbows and prepare to fire." Daramar waved his hand, and the blood-armored demon garrison captain helplessly conveyed the commander's order to his subordinates. Every blood-armored demon had a hellfire crossbow in addition to the hellfire spear in their hands. It was their natural weapon. In their hands, these heavy crossbows made of brass and bone didn't need to be strung at all. They only needed a simple spellcasting action to shoot out an attack similar to a flame arrow. It was not a true flame arrow, but a small amount of pure Bader's power that could ignore most energy resistance. Therefore, this attack could also kill the devils that were immune to fire. In fact, the demon hounds that were running back received the first wave of attack. Thousands of blood-armored demons pulled the trigger at the same time, and the flame arrows flew out like a swarm of bees. Whether it was the demon hounds or the abyss ghouls, as long as they were within range, each monster received one or two. Quickly load the crossbows and fire a few more times. Like a wheat field that had been cut by a sickle, the monsters all fell to the ground. Daramar could not help but excitedly give the order when he saw this. Because the hellfire crossbow could only be used by Batsu, it was especially suitable for the blood-armored demons to use, so he did not treat it as his own. Daramar did not feel the slightest bit of heartache when he gave the order. He also did not consider whether using it frequently would cause damage to his equipment. Under his urging, the blood-armored demons shot dozens of times in a short period of time, almost plowing the ground in front of the fortress. The ghouls that had been preparing to attack the city had all fallen to the ground. Because their undying nature had been annihilated by Barthos's power, they had all died with hatred. Because Daramar's order was too hasty, the hellfire crossbows of some blood-armored demons exploded, causing a lot of extra damage. Coupled with the casualties of the devil hounds, half of the burnt sacrifice demons' original army seemed to have been cut in half. However, Dalamar wasn't a burnt offering demon. He was the first 9-headed demon dragon in the multiverse, so he naturally wouldn't feel the pinch. The only thing that bothered him was that until now, the exchange system's notification still hadn't appeared. This meant that Stim had yet to determine that the commander of the Abyss Ghouls had failed. It was very likely that the other party still had other tricks up their sleeve. Due to Murphy's Law, sometimes the more you worry that something bad will happen, the more likely it is to happen. Just as the blood-armored demons were starting to deal with the casualties that had just occurred, something strange happened. Rocks the size of small mountains fell from the sky. A mountain range in the distance was suddenly overturned. An astonishingly huge monster tore off its disguise and kept throwing rocks at the fortress. "It's that colossal bull demon!" The blood-armored demon in the watchtower suddenly roared. However, he didn't know that his words coincided with Daramar's thoughts. Although his life essence had undergone a transition and evolved into a legendary level 9-headed demon dragon, Daramar still hadn't forgotten how terrifying that colossal bull demon was when he faced it with the other dragons in the Megalosaurus army. The moment he saw it again, he had some thoughts of turning around and running away. However, that would mean giving up on the general flag on him. All his previous efforts and all the forces he had built up would be wiped out. Therefore, he couldn't run away now. In order to compete for the ultimate overlord and obtain the generous rewards, he had to fight even if he had to bite the bullet. Damn it! Daramar's eyes scanned around. He knew that since the colossal bull demon had appeared, the suspected demon lord should not be far away. I have to find him and let the blood-armored demon legion deal with him. I only need to restrain and kill the colossal bull demon. Previously, the ancient red dragon Hellfire army had severely injured and even almost killed this colossal bull demon. Daramar had seen the whole process, so he still had a certain understanding of the strength of this colossal bull demon. He felt that he should be able to kill it. As for that demon lord, even if it should be just the incarnation of a demon lord, Daramar felt that he shouldn't fight with it easily. The other party might have some means that could easily kill him. Thinking of this, he immediately ordered the blood-armored demon garrison captain, use Hell's Roar quickly. Use spells to increase the range of the cannons. Try to cover the surroundings of the colossal bull demon as much as possible. If any invisible creatures appear, the blood-armored demon legion will immediately move out and kill them. What about that colossal bull demon? Someone must restrain its movements. If we let it throw boulders to attack the city wall after a while. After hearing this order, the blood-armored demon garrison captain asked suspiciously. He was very clear about the number of soldiers in the fortress. You just need to kill that invisible creature. It should be a Tauren with demon blood. Daramar deliberately concealed the strength of the opponent and explained to the garrison captain, as for that colossal bull demon, leave it to me. He raised the dragon head warhammer in his hand, threw it up and caught it again as if showing off. Then, his eyes turned cold. Hurry up and carry out the mission. Not long after, the Hell's Roar that had been fired before was pushed out again by the blood-armored demon cannoneers. Due to the huge size of the colossal bull demon, the cannoneers were ordered to cover the surroundings of its body, so they could fire without much aiming. Boom! The sound of gunpowder exploding was heard. Under the effect of the range-increasing spell, the cannoneers shot out and flew into the distance. Then, with the second explosion of the cannoneers, even the soil and stones in the area where the cannoneers landed were affected. The blood-armored demon legion's lookout soon found something abnormal in the smoke and dust. The smoke and dust in a certain area were too thick. It was the result of dust accumulating on the shield-type spell. Over there. Use dimensional interference. Chapter 412. He's using Hellscream again. Walking in the half-collapsed tunnel, Keyes could not help but feel speechless. God knows what was going on above. Couldn't he have fired all the cannonballs in one go to achieve a better coverage, and at the same time achieve a more perfect cleansing? As the ground continued to tremble, the ceiling of the tunnel rustled with dust, and it was unknown when it would collapse. And Keyes was somewhat helpless about this. Whether it was transforming into a megalosaurus or using magic, there was a possibility that others would notice. Therefore, he could only search for the right path while using the arches that had been broken a long time ago and were already somewhat decaying to make more protective supports for himself. If the tunnel really collapsed and completely buried him, all of his plans would be ruined. 3 natural days ago, Keyes had successfully created the legendary clockwork megalosaurus as the shelter for the phantom dragons. Not only did he receive the reward provided by Stim, but he was also given a temporary mission. Only by completing this mission could the clockwork megalosaurus he created be completely his. Otherwise, when the game ended, the phantom dragons, which were the core of the clockwork megalosaurus, would go out of control. Although Keyes was very confident that even if the phantom dragons went out of control, there was a high probability that he would not be attacked by them because of Sirota. But the temporary mission, Phantom Dragon's request, was related to the promise between the young blue dragon and the phantom dragons. Ding. The player has confirmed the request. The request is to take revenge on the rebels of the Megalosaurus army in the form of a special sneak attack. From the moment he received this notification, Keyes carried out 2 days of continuous intelligence gathering work, spending a lot of gold coins. He had to admit that there was nothing that could not be done with money. Stim's original exchange list did not have any information about other players in order to maintain the balance of the game. However, after 2 days of Keyes's continuous spending, the exchange list had undergone a huge change. Not to mention Daramar's current location, even the direction of his body strengthening, evolving into a 9-headed demon dragon, as well as the predicament of him being ambushed by the demon Lord Buffett's army, were clearly priced. They were sold to Quess, the rich tycoon, on the exchange list. Thus, the young blue dragon didn't leave the house, but all kinds of information regarding the mission target, Daramar, were placed on his desk. To his surprise, Quess learned that Daramar had once visited Boomtown and was responsible for the disappearance of the Mad Rats and the other laborers from a copy of the brief report on Daramar's whereabouts. That was worth 200 gold coins. In addition, Keyes also found out that the place where the guy was now stationed was actually the airdrop camp that he had built. After learning this information, he made a prompt decision. First, through the authority of the mayor of Boomtown, he issued a mission for himself on the internal bulletin board of the town's law enforcement team: punish the murderer, Daramar. In this way, he obtained the approval of the power of Bator. Although he was in the game and the plane of the Acid Fog Canyon isolated part of the influence of the power of Bator and the power of the Abyss, how could Stim, a god who hadn't even reached the level of great divine power, ban these two evil forces that were at the bottom of the multiverse? As a registered lord of Batsu who had his own territory, Keyes had the right and obligation to maintain order in his territory. Any criminal who was found to have committed a crime in Boomtown could be severely punished according to the laws of Bator. Moreover, such actions would be favored by the power of Bator. As a reward for carrying out the way of order, the law enforcement would be much smoother. After Keyes issued this mission for himself, he found the magic consultant, Snade, and asked him to be ready to open the portal at any time and lead the army of Boomtown to pick him up. He himself went ahead and found the ruins of the laboratory where the steampunks had created the Demolic. When he showed the ultimate art to the tyrant worm, the mercenaries under its command escaped from the underground through a secret tunnel. Now it was just the opposite. With the habitual thinking of the Batsu army, they would most likely guard against teleportation spells sneaking into the fortress, but they would most likely not care about a low-end technology like a tunnel. With the help of the original owner of the laboratory, Keyes soon found the laboratory with a big hole in the ceiling. He turned into his human form and crawled into the tunnel under the collapsed ceiling. Back then, the power of that ultimate art was simply too great. Not only did it completely burn down the surrounding mushroom forest, even the underground tunnels that were dozens of feet deep were affected. Most of the tunnels had collapsed, and a few of them were simply impassable. In addition, the blood-armored demonic cannoneers in the nearby demonic fortress had begun to fire Hellscream, and the existing tunnels could collapse at any time. If it were not for Keyes's amazing strength, which allowed him to continuously dig without feeling tired, and the Blue Dragon's strong sense of direction underground, which allowed him to accurately identify the location and not dig in the wrong direction, his plan would have been declared a failure. However, despite the effort, the young blue dragon still carried a suitcase with him. He did not store it in his storage space. The suitcase was not big. It was similar in shape to the bronze boxes that were often used to store official documents or valuable items in the 9 prisons of Bator. The entire suitcase was made of metal. There were only 8 hollow decorations in the corners of the suitcase. Other than that, there were no other signs. The reason Keyes carried this suitcase with him was that it contained his legendary creation, the Clockwork Megalosaurus. The Clockwork Megalosaurus was a legendary construct creature. When it was born, it was endowed with many legendary abilities of mechanical construct. Among them was the peculiar mechanical fusion. As a legendary construct creature, The clockwork megalosaurus could temporarily establish a connection with a machine, and then reverse fusion with it. After the fusion, the clockwork megalosaurus would have two forms: the clockwork megalosaurus form and the ordinary mechanical form. When in the mechanical form, the clockwork megalosaurus could quickly change into another form through a legendary action. Moreover, this transformation could not be interrupted by any means. Out of some bad taste, Keyes personally created a suitcase-like music box and let the clockwork megalosaurus fuse with it. This way, when necessary, not only could he imitate a battle scene in a famous game or comic from his previous life by throwing the suitcase around, but when the clockwork megalosaurus transformed, the suitcase music box would also play an extremely hot-blooded background music. In your background music, no one can defeat you. Chapter 4:13. The cannon fire subsided. After discovering the traces of the enemy, the garrison captain gave the order. Apart from a small number of people who stayed behind to guard the fortress, the rest of the blood-armored demons attacked. Thanks to their advanced teleportation talents, they quickly surrounded the enemy and immediately activated another spell-like ability: dimensional interference. Although the spell-like ability of the blood-armored demons was not as powerful as the dimensional anchor, it won in numbers. Hundreds of dimensional interference superimposed on each other, causing the space on the battlefield to become extremely chaotic. No one dared to teleport here, except for the blood-armored demons themselves. With a cold humph, Buffett removed his invisibility. He knew that this trick could not fool the demon soldiers. Immediately, this demon lord chose a tactic that was more suitable for his appearance. He raised the machete in his hand and began to charge forward. Previously, Dalamar had revealed to the blood-armored demons that Buffett was only a Tauren with abyss demon blood. However, although the blood-armored demons were blindly loyal, they were not stupid. Therefore, they did not completely believe the words of this new commander. The captain of the garrison was even more cautious. To be safe, he ordered most of the blood-armored demons to attack at the same time. But when the enemy revealed himself, he was still shocked. How could this be a Tauren with abyss demon blood? This was clearly the infamous king of beasts. Even if he appeared here, there was a high probability that it was only an incarnation. Unlike the inexperienced Dalamar, the blood-armored demons fought on the front lines and had some understanding of the various demon lords. At this time, the captain of the blood-armored demons couldn't help but sigh in his heart. How did we end up with such a commander? Unfortunately, facing Buffett, who was like a gust of wind, it was too late for the blood-armored demons to retreat even if they wanted to. They had no choice but to brace themselves and face the ferocious-looking machete head-on, bracing themselves as they charged forward. For Bateau's honor! The captain of the garrison shouted with purgatory, hoping to stimulate the blood-armored demons' fighting spirit and boost their morale. After all, if they killed the enemy here, even if it was only an incarnation of a demon lord, it was still a supreme honor for the blood-armored demons. Of course, in order to obtain this special honor, many blood-armored demons had to put their lives on the line and fight for it. Don't fight him alone. He might be the beast monarch of the tainted Ta'Nali. Form a small team formation and attack together. The blood-armored demon guard captain was giving instructions to his subordinates through telepathy instead of words. The blood-armored demons also reacted and immediately formed small teams of 4. They were very skilled and efficient. The formation formed by the elite demon infantry was like a gradually clenching palm, squeezing towards the demon lord that was surrounded. The blood-armored demons in the front row of each squad waved their hellish spears and tried their best to stab the enemies. The blood-armored demons in the back row took out their hellfire crossbows and were ready to shoot. If it were an ordinary Thanner re-demon, he would have been flustered and lost his composure in this situation. Unfortunately, they were not only facing a demon spirit, but also Buffett, who was very experienced in battle. Looking at the spear in front of him, This powerful Minotaur demon revealed a disdainful smile. "Good strategy, but you are too weak." Buffett mocked loudly as he waved the machete in his hand and knocked away the hellish spears one by one. What was more terrifying was that even though this beast monarch was surrounded, he still had energy to spare and did not seem to be in a hurry. He led the encirclement formation and moved little by little to the edge of the blood-armored demon's encirclement because the effect of dimensional interference was the weakest there. Every time he blocked a few attacks, he would find a chance to counterattack. And every time he counterattacked, he would reap the life of at least one blood-armored demon. The blood-armored demons were fighting in small teams. The casualties in the front row continued to increase, while the archers in the back row, because of Buffett's rhythmic movements, would often lose their targets and even shoot their teammates in the front row. After the blood-armored demons died, a large number of maggots would surge out from their corpses and wildly attack the surroundings, regardless of friend or foe. But every time Buffett killed a blood-armored demon, he would always take the correct step and hide himself behind the other blood-armored demons. To put it bluntly, the famous maggot explosion had a much greater impact on the blood-armored demon army than the demon lord. Change the formation, give up on using the Hellfire crossbow, don't give him any space to move. The guard captain hurriedly changed the order. At the same time, there was another battle taking place on this battlefield. The 9-headed demon dragon Dalamar was fighting the giant bull demon Bonators. After drinking the ultimate deadly terror elixir, Dalamar's body underwent a huge change. His body became much larger than before. Now, his 9-headed demon dragon form was even stronger than the ancient red dragon Hellfire Tyrant. It was precisely because of his physique that he was able to fight evenly with Bonators, and it was hard to tell who would win. However, even Dalamar had to admit that although there was no difference in size, his combat experience was lacking compared to the Hellfire Tyrant and the giant bull demon in front of him. If they continued to fight, the giant beast that would lose in the end would most likely be Dalamar and not Bonators. But this was only an if. Dalamar had never wanted a fair duel. He was prepared to play a dirty game. The 8 heads that stretched out from his back found an opportunity. With 4 heads in a group, they clamped down on the giant bull demon's arms. Then, he placed his sharp claws on the giant bull demon's head. Although he was unable to tear through the furry but extremely tough skin, he was able to stop the giant bull demon's horn attack. After waiting for this opportunity with great difficulty, Dalamar's main head immediately shouted, "Dragon Head Warhammer, fly over!" The weapon that had been cast with the giant transformation spell spun and flew over from the direction of the fortress. Dalamar gently tilted his head and guided it towards the giant bull demon's chest. The ferocious dragon head on the hammer suddenly opened its bloody mouth and bit down on the giant bull demon's heart. Moo! Under the pain, Bonators couldn't help but raise his head and howl loudly. Using his arms, he lifted the 9-headed demon dragon. Dalamar let go of one of his claws and touched the handle of the dragon head warhammer. He used it as a lever and tore open the giant bull demon's chest. The bloody demon heart appeared in front of Dalamar. Without hesitation, like a falcon returning to its nest, his main head quickly drilled into the big hole in the giant bull demon's chest. Chapter 4:14. When Keyes saw a broken iron door, he knew that he had reached the end of his underground march. After digging out the last section of the collapsed tunnel, an indescribable stench hit him in the face. It was unavoidable. Covering his face with his sleeve, Keyes stepped out of the secret tunnel and entered the fortress that once belonged to him. There were bloodied collars, broken bones, thick iron fences, and piles of feces everywhere. Moving carefully to avoid the dirt on the ground, Quest cut open the fence, and when he got out, he saw a nameplate. Kennel. It was changed into a place to raise demon hounds. No wonder it's so stinky. After thinking for a while, Keyes decided on a plan. He should have thought about it more carefully, but the stench here was really unbearable. He quickly walked out of the kennel. At this time, in the demonic fortress, there were only a few blood-armored demons guarding the walls. There were not many demons guarding the fortress. Therefore, Keyes did not spend much effort to find Daramar's current residence, which was also the command room of the burnt offering demon. According to the habit of the Batsu overlords, they would usually store some important but not too necessary things here. For example, some seals that could only be issued to certain departments. Generally speaking, those seals were for the use of the Batsu overlords to the lower-level officials. Keyes had given them to his companions. But for a demon Ba who had a strong desire for control, any action of dividing power needed careful consideration. And the process of thinking was usually very long. Even when the seals were covered with starch and changed color, they were still not issued. Quess was rather familiar with the temperament of the demons. So he boldly guessed that there might be 1 or 2 seals in the command room where the burnt offering demon used to be. At the same time, because he had bought all kinds of information about Daramar, Keyes knew that the traitor did not seem to have much knowledge. There was a high probability that Daramar did not find the secret compartment where the seals were stored. As expected, moving away from the commander's seat and lifting up a piece of carpet, Keyes discovered a locked bronze box. The bronze box was a typical devil's storage device. The lock on it had lost its function due to the death of its owner. Without much effort, Keyes tore open the lock and carefully opened the bronze box. The collection inside could be said to be rich. A number of soul prisms, a variety of spellcasting materials, many personal books. The box itself seemed to have been cast with an internal expansion spell. The storage space was astonishingly large. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good time to check the spoils of war. The young blue dragon quickly found a few seals. Then, he sealed it again and put it in his storage space for future inspection. Judging from the style of these seals, they should be the standard seals issued directly by the Expeditionary Army of the 9 prisons of Bader. Moreover, each seal seemed to have been toyed with repeatedly by the burnt sacrifice demon. There was a layer of burn marks on them. However, the handwriting on the seals was very clear. The densely packed infernal language was engraved very clearly. The reason why these seals could give Batsu authority was because of these words. They were the true names of the lesser devils. Even if there were no magic undulations on them, as long as one held onto these seals, the devils with their true names engraved on them would be able to sense it. The only thing was that they had to be closer to those devils. Picking through them, Keyes found a seal engraved with the words Seal of the Hellscream, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. Soon after, a burst of thick smoke rose, and the young blue dragon transformed from his human form into a pit fiend. I think he'll be more convincing like this. Sticking out his snake-like tongue, Keyes licked his lips and familiarized himself with the pit fiend's movements. The young blue dragon had transformed into a pit fiend of mirage. He had a single horn on his head, and his physique was much sturdier than the average pit fiend. In addition, he was a lord of Batsu, the mayor of Boom Town. If he didn't control himself, his body would naturally emit the aura of a greater devil. It wasn't a real aura, but more like a sixth sense. Even the lowly lesser devils could sense the degree of care that other devils received from Batsu's power. His explanation was simple and comprehensive. Right now, Qyth was more like a pit fiend from the inside out than a real pit fiend. This also meant that after Keyes left Daramar's residence, he didn't have to be wary of the Gorarms on duty. He swaggered through the stronghold, and any devil he passed not only wouldn't be inspected, but would even bow to him as a sign of respect. "How dare you slack off like this?" The sudden voice shocked the blood-armored demonic cannoneer who was staring at the battlefield in the distance. He immediately grabbed his weapon. However, when he turned around and saw who was questioning him, he almost threw away the hell spear in his hand with a clang. My lord." Even though he didn't know when a pit fiend had appeared in the stronghold, He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine when he saw the gigantic devil wrap his wings around his body and stare at him with eyes that burned like embers. Even if he had his suspicions, he could feel the care of Batsu's power on him. The Gorarms would never be wrong about that. The commander of this stronghold is simply messing around. He's fighting with an abyssal, but he's not calling for artillery support? In his pit fiend form, Keys took a step forward, passing by the Gorarms who were trembling in fear. He raised his hand and slapped a hellscream. If you don't use these weapons now, are you going to keep them until they rust? Or perhaps you have slacked off. Turning his head slightly, Quest glanced at the group of blood-armored demonic cannoneers who had gathered over. His razor-sharp teeth bared as he said sinisterly, The captain of the Gorarms hurriedly stepped out of the crowd, bowing as he took 2 steps forward to stand in front of Keys. My lord, may I ask if you're here to supervise military affairs? I've never been in a stronghold before. The huge pit fiend extended his palm and tapped the captain of the blood-armored fiend cannoneers. His life was at stake, and it was the most humiliating way for a devil to do so. He didn't even have time to cry out in alarm before he was forcefully stripped of the power of Batsu by the pit fiend's abyssal molding, turning him into a weak and disgusting lesser devil. Keys then raised his foot and stomped on him, turning him into a pile of minced meat. Do I need you to run your mouth? P.S. Words below don't count. Thank you to Shoutang 246, Ink Journey, and Stargazing 1996 for their tip. Also, I've been listening to the opinions of some seniors, and I want to start a book group. I hope everyone can join in the fun. I'm just a newbie, and I've stepped on a lot of poisonous spots before, which led to the book's lackluster result. I want to change that. After all, I asked myself if this book was worth reading. Chapter 4:15. Do you have any questions now? The pit fiend spoke in Infernal. If you want to ask, then ask. I'm in a hurry. The blood-armored fiend cannoneers were silent in response. All devils would instinctively submit to Bator. Then we'll follow the rules. Just like the rain of fire that fell from the skies of Avernus, the pit fiend's arrogant attitude suddenly changed. He took out an item solemnly. This is the credential issued by the Bator Expeditionary Army to dispatch you. Keys showed the seal he'd found in the secret compartment of Dalamar's residence to everyone. He'd skillfully completed his performance. We'll follow your orders. The blood-armored fiend cannoneers did not dare to doubt him, as they could feel their real names engraved on the seal. Although Keys could not order them to attack Dalamar due to the influence of the general flag, he only needed to express it in a different way. Then what are you waiting for? The young blue dragon in the form of a pit fiend roared loudly. Why aren't you providing artillery support? The so-called artillery support meant that Hellscream would cover the entire battlefield where the Devil Army and the enemy were fighting, regardless of whether the enemy was friend or foe. This tactic was not foreign to the Batsu Devil. In fact, it could even be said that they were very familiar with it. On the front lines of the Blood War, it was common to see the legion of devils firing thousands of cannons in unison, turning the battlefield into a scene of hell. This was because all devils were immune to fire damage, while the Tana Re-demons only had some resistance to fire damage. The only thing to take note of was that the cannoneers had to control the point of impact to prevent the shockwaves and shrapnel from causing too much damage to the devils. This was not difficult most of the time. However, the one commanding the blood-armored fiend cannoneers to provide artillery support was Keys. What are you afraid of? He waved a whip of flames, whipping the back of the blood-armored fiend that was carefully calculating the coordinates, leaving a bloody wound. Keys, who had transformed into a pit fiend, roared, Bator's army isn't that weak. A few cannonballs won't kill them. Aim at your commander. Keys reached out and moved the barrel. Can't you see that he's fighting the colossal bull demon? At this time, what we need the most is artillery support. Although he hasn't given the order yet, he definitely hopes that you can send the artillery shells to him. As a master of bewitchment who could deceive the judges of Yugros, the young blue dragon's words were extremely persuasive and logical. Hell's Roar's bombardment dealt EOE damage, which could effectively kill the huge Tanaree. Although Daramar was not a devil, after fusing with the Baler's heart, his entire body was wrapped in flames, and he was clearly immune to fire damage. On top of that, the Pit Fiend had taken out the seal used to command the cannoneers. The blood-armored fiends guessed that this was something Dalamar had left behind for himself. Therefore, they all obeyed Keys's instructions and turned the muzzles of the Hellscream to aim at Daramar, who was entangled with the giant bull demon, and fired. Asterisk rumble. Asterisk like a sudden clap of thunder, more than 100 Hellscream cannons seemed to burst forth with their fury at the same time. The artillery shells shot out, streaking across the horizon. At this moment the entire battlefield could hear the deafening sound, except for Daramar himself, or rather, his main head. His other 8 heads had just grown out. Apart from being as nimble as his limbs, they had yet to develop consciousness. Thus, even if they could hear the sound, they could not allow the main head's consciousness to hear and obtain information. His main head was currently in the large hole in the colossal bull demon's chest, busily gnawing at the enemy's heart. Although the colossal bull demon was heavily injured, its sturdy muscles still clamped tightly around Daramar's neck, trying to suffocate him. Under Keys's deliberate command, the blood-armored fiend cannoneers' shells mostly hit Daramar and the colossal bull demon. Already heavily injured, Pontours was unable to resist the bombardment of the artillery shells, and many wounds appeared on his body. The Hydra's situation was slightly better. When the shells landed on its thick body, they only managed to peel off a few scales at most. This isn't enough, Keys thought to himself as he saw this scene. I need to give him something more. Worried that he would be noticed, he glanced at Buffett, who was fighting the blood-armored fiends, from the corner of his eye. That should be the beast monarch. But why would he come to the plain of Acid Fog Canyon? But since he's here, Keys thought to himself, let's not leave. Boomtown isn't the only one that's lost in this battle anyway. Thinking of this, he patted the barrel of the cannon beside him, which was slightly hot from the continuous firing. Continue the artillery support, don't stop. Afterwards, the young blue dragon diverted some of his attention, communicating with the exchange list of the stim game and quickly checking it. Beat. 10 rounds of impact oil shells have been exchanged. Cost, 1,000 gold coins. Please check. The familiar voice rang out once again. Even in the noisy battlefield, the voice that reached Quest's ears was still very clear. Change to this new type of shell. After the exchange was successful, he immediately ordered, aim at Commander Daramar. Provide artillery support. Following his words, a total of 10 crates appeared beside him. Each of the crates contained an impact oil cannonball. Upon receiving the order, the blood-armored fiend cannoneers who were around Keys hurriedly ran over. They were also the best at firing. They carefully took out the cannonballs from the box and filled them into the barrel of the Hellscream, which had already been pressurized with gunpowder. Fire! Mixed with the surrounding sounds of firing, the combatants fighting on the battlefield did not notice the new type of cannonball landing at all. However, when the round impact oil cannonball hit Daramar, who was working hard, a violent explosion suddenly occurred. The reason it was called an impact oil shell was because it contained many alchemical potions called impact oil. The nature of this potion was extremely unstable. It was safe to store it inside the shell, but when it landed on the 9-headed demon dragon, the shell of the shell instantly shattered into pieces. The impact oil was immediately activated, vaporizing and igniting at an extremely fast speed, followed by a violent explosion. Even though Daramar was immune to fire damage, the shock wave that came close to the surface of his body still tore through his layers of scales. Many of the wounds were deep to the bone. Compared to the pain of only having his scales torn off, the pain of having his flesh and blood disappear in the explosion was undoubtedly much more intense. He fiercely contracted the muscles in his neck, and quickly pulled his neck out of the hole in the giant bull demon's chest. "Who dares to hurt me?" Chapter 4:16. Just as Daramar was roaring in anger, the insults and insults that followed caused him to be enraged. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to say that he was enraged out of humiliation. In any case, Daramar was furious. His eyes that were stained with the blood of the gigantic minotaur opened once more in the darkness. The first thing he saw was a suitcase that was spinning towards his face. At the same time, not far from his face was a pit fiend that was laughing savagely. Because of the general's flag, Daramar knew all the information about the members of the stronghold. This devil before him was definitely not one of them. For safety's sake, he did not dare let the suitcase get close to him. Blazing flames shot out from one of the 8 heads, instantly focusing on the target. His other heads stared at the pit fiend not far away, preventing him from launching a sneak attack. "Who ordered you to attack me?" "You." Leyland's eyes were fixed on the pit fiend not far away. Because Keyes had used perfect shapeshifting, Daramar was unable to see through the true form of the pit fiend in front of him. He wanted to ask some questions and use the devil's words to obtain some useful information. However, before he could finish, the suitcase that had been hit by the flames began to change. Hum, 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 3 consecutive sounds rang out, an extremely shocking prelude. Then, from the suitcase, which was actually a music box, an infectious melody began to play. The flames that the Hydra had spat out had not been able to harm it in the slightest. The music box that was in the state of mechanical fusion immediately changed shape. Turn courage into wings. Attack violent. Megalosaurus. Hovering in the air, Keyes could not help but voice out the background music that had left a deep impression on him from his previous life. The music box now no longer resembled a music box. The various parts were constantly spinning, deconstructing, and reassembling. Large mechanical dragon wings popped out from within, followed by a ferocious dragon head, and finally the complete body of the Megalosaurus. This was the first time this legendary construct had stepped onto a battlefield, occupying the center of the stage without hesitation. A legendary grade construct. Although he was in the midst of a fierce battle with the blood-armored Demon Legion, Buffett still diverted a part of his attention to the situation of his mount, Panotus. Hence, he saw the appearance of the Megalosaurus almost immediately. Is it a partial derivative of Anisim, or a creation of Lord Singularity? The beast monarch guessed. It looks like it's under the command of that pit fiend. It doesn't seem like a chaos abomination, but a creation of order. As he thought of something, he could not help but gasp, and even his face became a little unsightly. Stim, that fellow! It was no wonder that the demon lord was so suspicious. The young blue dragon's craftsmanship was just too good, actually creating a legendary grade construct. It should be noted that in the multiverse, those who could create legendary constructs were all powerful beings. The Lord Singularity, that Buffett guessed was a big shot of the eternal neutral mechanical realm of order, and the Lord of the Demon's Burrows. Although there were rumors that the powerful god had died at the mouth of Orcus, killed by his last word, a demon lord of the Minotaur King's level would not believe it at all. After all, the half-machine, half-flesh Demon's Burrows in the mechanical realm were still alive and well. Moreover, the divine agents of the Singularity were still active in some planes. Even in the bottomless abyss, Buffett should not be afraid of the threat of the Singularity. However, he still would not let his guard down. In his long life, he had seen many Demon's Burrows under the command of the Singularity throw themselves into bloody battles, aiding the devils in order to carry out the path of order. Perhaps this Megalosaurus that appeared now was actually a construct created by the god for some purpose. Fet-e Hamar. He chanted a short incantation. He began to make preparations for whether he would fight or retreat in the future. Unlike the king of beasts who was knowledgeable, but whose train of thought had deviated, Daramar, who was directly facing the clockwork dragon, paid more attention to quests. From his point of view, this construct in front of him was a summoned creature of the pit fiend, despite its magnificent transformation. The best way to deal with a summoned creature was undoubtedly to control its summoner, whether it was to kill or defeat it. The only problem was that it was not easy to deal with the summoner who had summoned this construct. After all, it was a pit fiend. Beep. Would you like to exchange for Nethario Origin armor, damaged? Due to severe damage to the armor, it will cost 100 gold coins to maintain it for a third of an hourglass. Dalamar reminded himself, all efforts will be rewarded. He communicated with the exchange list to make the exchange. Because he'd spent an additional 10 gold coins, he'd even received a quick get-up service. The Origin armor that had been repaired at the last minute was quickly put on the Hydra's body. The bolts that had been nailed into his body caused him some pain, and he couldn't help but roar, "I'll kill you, you little devil!" However, this was actually a diversion. After shouting this threat, the Hydra quickly opened the bloody maw of its main head. Scorching acid gushed out from its throat, turning into a flood that rushed towards the Megalosaurus that had just transformed. With his limited experience, Dalamar knew that dealing with constructs was similar to dealing with steel golems. Ordinary flame breaths would not cause any harm to it, and were far less effective than acid breaths. Thus, he'd gained the upper hand by a show of strength, and then spat out acid to ambush his opponent. Unfortunately, he hadn't succeeded. After this attack, Dalamar had been about to launch a series of fierce attacks on the pit fiend Keys had transformed into. However, who would have thought that the Megalosaurus made of clockwork and cogwheels only seemed to open its mouth, opening and closing it twice. A thick wall of earth suddenly appeared in front of him, completely blocking the 9-headed demon dragon's acid breath. Dalamar's gaze turned cold. Just as he thought of something, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his abdomen where he was lying on the ground. One of the heads on his back immediately bent down to look at his abdomen, but all he could see was a sharp claw waving about. Ah! The 9-headed demonic dragon howled in agony. Although it wouldn't die, losing one of its heads was still excruciating. It was a heart-wrenching pain. Chapter 4:17. Thanks to the protection of the Origin armor, Daramar's abdomen had been injured, but the injury wasn't too serious. What had truly caused him a lot of damage was one of his secondary heads being cut off. Even the fingers were connected to the heart, let alone a single head. Every head of the 9-headed demon dragon gave him an additional appraisal bonus when resisting the negative effects such as blindness, deafness, charm, intimidation, dizziness, and panic. On the contrary, Daramar would be weakened with every head he lost. If he lost all his heads, he would immediately die. Without his wings, the Hydra could no longer rely on flight to avoid attacks from below like the Megalosaurus. However, his physique was far stronger than the average Megalosaurus, even by the standards of the ancient red dragons. Like a train that had deviated from its tracks, Daramar immediately scrambled to retreat far away after losing his head. As cunning as he was, he made use of the nearby giant bull demons, who were heavily injured and had difficulty moving, to use their massive bodies as cover. This is a bloody battlefield. The Bot-Or Legion should cooperate sincerely. After all, we're facing the demon Tana-Ri. Daramar tried his best to justify himself, as if wanting to use this as an opportunity to change the target of the Pit Fiend Summoner's attack. However, whether it was himself or the attacking Megalosaurus, they were no longer naive. They wouldn't be moved by simple words. Besides, Keys wasn't really like what Daramar thought. He was a pit fiend from the Bot-Or Legion that had come to supervise the battle. He'd brought Avengers with him, and there was more than one. The specter dragons were residing in the body of the clockwork megalosaurus, and had long since been unable to endure their thirst. "You're a traitor who speaks irresponsibly." With a series of creaking sounds, the clockwork megalosaurus roared in Draconic. It had fused with a music box with mech fusion, giving it the ability to speak. "You will burn to ashes in the fury of the megalosaurus. You will drown in the burning acid. You will beg for a quick death in the putrid swamp. You will fall apart in the merciless lightning prison. You will definitely perish in the cold wind." The spirit dragons cast their curses on Dharma, who was greatly shaken. Every single one of them did the same. Although these curses did not contain any magic elements, anyone could hear the endless resentment and determination in them. If he could not guess the origin of the enemy in front of him, Dharma would not have evolved from a green dragon into a 9-headed demonic dragon, but a multi-headed snake lizard. His intelligence wasn't that bad. The remaining 8 heads revealed shocked expressions at the same time. The 16 eyes were widened by Dharma at the same time. You are the remnants of the Megalosaurus army." The 9-headed demon dragon couldn't help but take a step back. Once again, he became cautious of the enemy before him, and began to analyze the enemy's true background. The clockwork Megalosaurus tail, which was made of chains, was pulled out from the ground. Its serrated pincers were holding onto the ferocious dragon head. This secondary head of the 9-headed demon dragon had yet to lose its vitality. Its bloody mouth was still slightly open, as if it was struggling to escape. "It's still quite lively. It's a pity to waste it." Thinking of something, Keys, who was hovering in the air, immediately used his psionic ability to communicate with the clockwork megalosaurus that was crushing this head. The latter then swung its tail and threw the spoils of war high up into the air, throwing it at the young blue dragon as if it was a baseball. "Oh, I'll leave that traitor to you guys. But remember to try out the new abilities of this new body." After getting Keys's approval, the clockwork megalosaurus body was completely opened up to the spirit dragons, allowing them to do whatever they wanted. Following the spirit dragons' thoughts, as well as their unreserved soul power, the clockwork megalosaurus body suddenly became noisy. A layer of cold frost began to appear on the armor plate made of Bartholomew, tightly sealing the energy in the body. The huge clockwork on its back, driven by the multi-stroke engine of Moradin, spun rapidly as if it was crazy. With the help of the spring taken from the mechanical realm legend, the surging heat energy was converted into potential energy, waiting for a certain moment to erupt. In the creaking sound of gears engaging, the wings of the clockwork megalosaurus instantly transformed into 2 spinning chainsaws. After the preparation was completed, the armor plates on the 2 ribs of the clockwork megalosaurus suddenly opened, and hot steam came out with a sizzling sound. "Activate assault mode." Just as Keys looked on with great interest, his legendary creation moved from stillness and launched a fierce attack on the target of revenge. The huge clockwork once again spun wildly, but in the opposite direction from before. The potential energy that had accumulated to the limit was instantly released, transforming into surging power, driving this behemoth forward rapidly. In assault mode, the clockwork megalosaurus seemed to no longer be weakened by the agility brought about by its size and weight. It was so agile that it made one's hair stand on end. At this moment, this legendary construct creature was like the kind of Kwai Kuling that was known for its agility, running faster than the speed of sound. Bang bang bang! In a series of sonic booms, the ground of the acid fog canyon was plowed into deep ravines. Moreover, the clockwork megalosaurus did not turn at all, either because it did not want to waste time in assault mode, or because it did not want to deal with the target. Without any detour, this huge construct creature directly pounced on the 9-headed demon dragon that was waiting for it. The first thing that came into contact with the enemy was not the fangs and claws of the clockwork megalosaurus, but the spinning chainsaws that were transformed from its wings. Like a grappling hug, the two spinning chainsaws worked on the left and right, cutting toward Dalamar's neck from both sides with a buzzing sound. Even though he reacted in time, allowing the chainsaws to cut through the origin armor, the feeling of being shocked still did not feel good. Amidst the nauseating noises, the chainsaws and the origin armor began to compete, instantly bursting out endless sparks. "You're courting death." The 9-headed demon dragon began to counterattack, its remaining 8 heads biting toward the clockwork megalosaurus from different directions. However, this legendary construct creature was the first to crash into its chest, interrupting its words and even breaking a few of its sternum. Corrosion spell. The 9-headed demon dragon, who was being attacked head-on by the clockwork megalosaurus, immediately began to use magic abilities to deal with the enemy in front of it. Because it had many heads, Dalamar's casting speed was much faster than when it was in its green dragon form, and the strength of its magic effects was also increased. Within a few breaths, a faint red mist shrouded the huge body of the clockwork megalosaurus, and the corrosion spell instantly took effect. On the body of the clockwork megalosaurus, many parts that were not made of bartoluite and other corrosion-resistant materials, especially some of the gears, began to rust, their strength greatly decreased, and then they cracked and fell off. It was only at this moment that a sly smile appeared on the face of Dalamar's head. "It's time." After a few mutters, the muscles of the 9-headed demon dragon's severed heads suddenly swelled, and 2 new heads grew out. Chapter 4:18. Although the Hydra's counterattack was not flashy, it was simple and practical, especially for a construct creature. In the light red mist of the rust spell, the construct creature would disintegrate bit by bit every moment, and the damage would accumulate. Compared to before, Daramar was much more confident. He even had the mind to mock his opponent during the attack. "Are you lacking calcium? Your creator probably didn't give you a good set of teeth. Your scratches are weak." These taunts caused Daramar to suffer an even stronger blow than he had imagined. Due to some broken gears, the megalosaurus drill-like sharp claws could not rotate completely for the time being. However, the remaining rotating claws still worked tenaciously and easily peeled off Daramar's scales and thick skin. They knew the characteristics of the opponent. When one head was cut off, 2 would grow out, and each head would make it stronger. Even the spirit dragons that controlled the megalosaurus's movements did not believe that there was no limit to this ability to cut off the head's strength. However, they would not cut blindly, at least not before they could cut off all the heads at once. The megalosaurus changed its strategy. In the strong attack mode, this legendary construct creature was amazingly agile. The chainsaw that popped out from its back danced like a butterfly among flowers. Together with the rotating claws, the megalosaurus created wounds on Daramar's body, making it difficult for the opponent to deal with. However, after evolving into the Hydra, Daramar's physique had been greatly improved. These wounds were actually not serious to him. As time passed, more and more pus flowed out from the wounds, and the broken flesh and scales were quickly glued together. At the same time, with 10 heads on his shoulders, his spellcasting ability had also improved greatly. Although it was still not like Tiamat, where each head could cast different spells, the strength and chanting speed of Daramar's spells had become completely different from before. He could even provide some super magic effects to the spells he cast, like some legendary spellcasters. Spell maximum, gigantification. As the incantation reached the target, the dragon head warhammer that had been in the vice leader's mouth suddenly changed and rapidly expanded. Twisting his neck forcefully, Daramar held the hammer in his mouth and swung the dragon-headed warhammer, accurately hitting the megalosaurus' sharp claws. However, this was not the end of the attack. The real killer move was actually hidden in the head of the dragon head warhammer. Clang clang clang, the ferocious dragon head on the giant war hammer instantly came to life and bit down viciously on one of the clockwork dragon's claws. Then, it quickly swallowed the dragon's claws into its mouth. The sound of metal being twisted suddenly rang out. Megalosaurus's entire arm hung limply on the ground due to the weight of the hammer. Taking advantage of this gap, Daramar grabbed his opponent's other intact arm and quickly moved to the side. Transfiguration. The 9-headed Hydra's secondary heads and necks turned into thick tentacles that coiled around the Megalosaurus's spinning springs, forcefully stopping it from spinning. Creak, creak. Although Daramar's tentacles had turned into a bloody mess, the Megalosaurus was obviously more affected. Under the effects of the rust spell, the strength of the gears and springs within its body decreased. Under the forced breaking, they all broke and collapsed. The Megalosaurus was forced out of its assault mode. Caught you! After temporarily suppressing this terrifying construct, Daramar's main head stared at Keys, who was still watching the show. Little devil, I'll deal with you later. Daramar thought to himself. He'd already listed out a series of methods to deal with pit fiends. Once he disassembled this construct, he would put them into practice. When he thought of this, he no longer hesitated. He immediately leaned over the Megalosaurus, using his abdomen that was covered in origin armor to suppress the clawed arm that he'd just captured. Daramar then stretched out his 2 forelimbs, grabbing the construct's head and twisting it forcefully. Let's see what other tricks you have up your sleeve. After the head of the clockwork dragon rotated nearly 180 degrees, many of the internal parts of the clockwork dragon exploded. The construct that had been attacking the Hydra ferociously just a moment ago suddenly collapsed to the ground, seemingly on the verge of death. Seeing this, Keys couldn't help but shrug his shoulders. It's still not enough to rely on actual combat. It's a pity. I've watched more movies than you. Keys calmly exchanged glances with Daramar, waving his hand kindly. Before Daramar could react, the head of the clockwork dragon, which seemed to have been broken, suddenly opened its bloody mouth. Steel drill breath. Just like the alien that Keys had seen in the movies from his previous world, a steel drill with a structure similar to the inner teeth of the alien suddenly shot out from the Megalosaurus mouth, piercing through Daramar's chest. It's us who caught you, little traitor. This sudden upheaval made the Hydra terrified. He didn't care about tearing his own wounds and wanted to escape first. Unfortunately, not only did he not watch as many movies as Keys, but he also played very few games. Blast take off. Daramar, who hadn't understood the meaning of this sentence, didn't have time to think. A violent explosion suddenly occurred below him. The Megalosaurus used its most powerful legendary ability, which it could only use once a week. Following the will of this legendary construct, half of its body turned into an equivalent amount of high explosives and immediately detonated. The shock wave, shrapnel, and heat would cause unimaginable damage to the enemy directly facing this explosion. The remaining body of the Megalosaurus was protected by the eternal ice, so it wouldn't be affected by the explosion. Although Daramar wasn't afraid of the high temperature of the flames, because he was too close, the flying shrapnel and shockwave still sent him flying. When he landed on the ground, he was covered in wounds. The Hydra's originally healthy gem-like green skin had now become much lighter, like a cup of chartreuse that had changed its quality. What was even more terrifying was that there was a huge hole in his chest, and his internal organs were blown into paste, dripping out of his body. The explosion affected a wide area. The gigantic bull demons that had fainted earlier, as well as the blood-armored demons and Buffet who were fighting, were all baptized by the shockwave. Even the walls of Fort Bator in the distance had a small part of it collapse. The spirit dragons residing in the Megalosaurus body seemed to be shocked by the terrifying explosion, and their souls were constantly in turmoil. Keys, who had escaped early, flashed back and used his psionic ability to communicate with the spirit dragons. Don't worry, this happens often. The spirit dragons. The following content will not be counted in the word count. Thank you to Stargazy 1996, Shoutang 246, Bookfriend 20190, 52917122623, Ink Trip, and other big shots for tip. Your support is the motivation for the new author to work hard to update. Chapter 419. Suffering from the Clockwork Megalosaurus's unique legendary spell, Explosion to the Heavens, Daramar had lost more than 90% of his life. Given enough time, with his powerful self-healing ability, he would only need half a day to recover some of his vitality. But Keys, who was very immersed in the game, actually got itchy and brazenly snatched the nine-headed demon dragon's head. Of course, his actions were more subtle. Not only did he not use any physical attacks, he did not even use any damaging spells. Spell penetration, malicious transfiguration. Following the young blue dragon's incantation, the struggling Daramar instantly turned into an ordinary dragon beast with a poof. His internal organs were heavily injured, more than 90% of his bones were shattered, and he did not have the strong physique of the nine-headed demon dragon. What else could he do? There was only death. A mere malicious transfiguration took the life of the nine-headed demon dragon, as well as the legend of the evil dragon that had yet to be spread. Thus, almost like a trick, Keys easily obtained the 2 general flags that floated out of Daramar's body after his death. He actually has 3 general flags. Looking at the gains in his hands, Keys could not help but be secretly shocked. Although he had already guessed that since Daramar was able to obtain the authority to command the demon fortress, he had most likely obtained a general flag. But what Keys did not expect was that apart from the general flag of the Legion of Devils and his own general flag of the neutral camp, this nine-headed demon dragon actually had a broken general flag of the Megalosaurus army. If he had not stopped here, this Daramar might have really achieved something. At the very least, he would have become one of the candidates for the final overlord. Keys objectively evaluated his enemy. Although his opponent had already died miserably, the young blue dragon did not underestimate him at all. I underestimated him before, but I don't know how many participants like him are hidden in Stim's game. The sound of gears meshing and springs returning to their original position interrupted Keys's reverie. A brand new clockwork Megalosaurus began to condense its body. Under the protection of eternal ice, the explosion just now did not harm the phantom dragon hidden in the legendary construct. When they recovered from their shock, they immediately began to use the legendary ability to repair the clockwork Megalosaurus. Ding! Killed the nine-headed demon dragon in a sneak attack. The mission Phantom Dragon's request has been identified. The reward is being issued. Ding! The Spectre Dragon's will is bound to the Clockwork Dragon. Once the game ends, players can freely take it away. It was a familiar feeling. It wasn't a notification sound, but rather a divine power fluctuation that he had sensed before. It was coming from the Clockwork Dragon. Upon contact, Keys could feel it. He began trying to learn something. Divine power, demon divine, and divine, it disappear. Just as he had the epiphany, the elusive god of virtual games had used his divine power to modify the Clockwork Dragon. The effects produced by divine power were, of course, extraordinary. The Clockwork Megalosaurus had a completely new appearance. If it had been crude before, it now looked like a meticulously molded figurine. Not only that, but thanks to the omnipotent divine power, this legendary construct's body structure had also been optimized. Originally, the Clockwork Megalosaurus's body structure was slightly bloated due to some of its creator's lingering thoughts about multi-riveted steamed steel. However, under the improvement of divine power, many unnecessary parts were removed without hesitation, vanishing without a trace. The multi-stroke engine that had been abandoned by Moradin, the core power unit of the Clockwork Megalosaurus, had been greatly improved. At least it was no longer an abandoned, defective product and would no longer malfunction easily. Apart from optimization and completion, The most obvious modification effect of divine power was that it had provided the clockwork megalosaurus with a second power system out of thin air. Previously, even though the clockwork megalosaurus had the specter dragon's assistance and energy supply, at the end of the day, it was still the power of magic that drove its movements. If it were to enter the realm of death magic, or a positive energy plane that was more restrained against the specter dragon, its energy efficiency would probably be greatly reduced. Without energy to drive its body, even if the clockwork megalosaurus was not a pile of scrap metal, it was just a good for show to scare people. The second power system provided by divine power, the use of fuel to power the multi-stroke engine, had made up for this flaw for the clockwork megalosaurus. As long as there was enough black oil as fuel, the clockwork megalosaurus would still be able to maintain sufficient combat power and fight without hindrance, even in places that could be regarded as forbidden zones for traditional construct life forms. This is really a pleasant surprise. After learning about this improvement, Keyes could not help but feel a little excited. He had previously obtained a magical item called Olamoki's Bucket of Waste. As long as he offered some precious metals and gemstones, he would be able to exchange a large amount of black oil from the Earth elemental plane. Therefore, even if the clockwork megalosaurus had become a big oil consumer, the young blue dragon was still not worried. After all, it had oil in its hands, and it was the kind that carried it everywhere. There were 2 flowers, 1 branch on each side. While Keyes was still calmly accepting his reward, the battle between the blood-armored demon army and the Buffett clan had already reached its climax. Although the general flag that Daramar had seized from the burnt sacrifice demon was quickly taken into the hands of Keyes, the sudden change in commander had still weakened the morale of the Batsu army. Under the powerful surprise attack of the demon lord, the formation that had been struggling to hold on could no longer hold on. Many of the blood-armored demons even wanted to retreat from the battlefield for the first time to avoid the ferocious Tauren in front of them. Beep. The blood-armored demon army's morale has dropped. If it reaches a certain level, there may be dispersal, mutiny, or other unfavorable situations. The familiar notification sounded, waking the young blue dragon from his daydream, and alerting him to the situation on the battlefield. All troops retreat. Provide cover fire. After thinking for a moment, Keyes gave his first order to the devils he'd just taken over. With the approval of their commander, the blood-armored demons felt as if they'd been pardoned. They decisively abandoned their defensive formation and began to use their powerful spells. Because they'd used a large amount of dimensional interference before, the space on the battlefield had been disrupted. Only the blood-armored demons within the army could use their companions as coordinates, and alternately use spatial spells. As for Buffett, even though he was a powerful demon lord, he still couldn't compare to the legion of devils in this aspect. Cowardly little devils! The beast lord roared angrily, his eyes darting around in an attempt to find a few punching bags on the battlefield to vent his anger. Buffett saw the pit fiend that he'd been wary of before. It seemed to be advancing instead of retreating, spreading its wings and rushing towards him. Let me test your capabilities. Looking at the great devil that seemed to be provoking him, Buffett's battle intent surged, and his desire to kill exploded. Chapter 420. Finally, we have a competent commander. Back on the walls of the stronghold, the captain of the blood-armored fiends reassessed the situation and made a fair assessment. Although the demon's definition of loyalty was, at most, directed towards the implementation of the Bartholomew's concept of orderly evil. However, having served an incompetent commander like Dalamar, the blood-armored fiends were more inclined to approve of this new commander. After all, he wasn't just a powerful pit fiend, although he wasn't, but someone who could decisively charge to the front lines to fight against a powerful demon lord, bringing up the rear for the retreating troop. Quickly prepare the glory of Bader. If necessary, we need to reinforce the commander, the captain hurriedly ordered. The so-called glory of Bator was similar to the burning explosion of the Baylor demons. It was a secret technique of the blood-armored demon army. Every blood-armored fiend army had to have such a structure. There was no lack of devout worshippers of the 9 prisons of Bator. When fighting against the demons, the blood-armored fiends could pick out the most fanatical of them and give them a noble mission. There was no need for persuasion or bluffing. They only needed to tell the blood-armored fiend that they would contribute everything to Bator and clear an obstacle. The blood-armored fiend would gladly accept. Then, under the praise of the blood-armored fiends, he would evolve into a blood-armored berserk fiend. He was far more dangerous than an ordinary blood-armored fiend, especially to the demons he fought against. From the moment a blood-armored fiend was born until it turned into ashes, it would always remain in the state of unparalleled inferno. They would forget all pain, charging towards the demons fighting against the blood-armored fiends with bloodshot eyes. Even if they were injured, they wouldn't make a sound. Every time their spears pierced their targets, they would deal twice the damage as before. What was even more outrageous was that when a blood-armored fiend received a fatal blow, it would enter a temporary state of unparalleled. Even if it died immediately, the blood-armored fiend would still be able to close in on its opponent with the support of this state. Just like how an ordinary blood-armored fiend could explode with a maggot explosion, the blood-armored fiend would also explode upon death. And it was even more intense. The explosion after the blood-armored berserk demon's death was even more terrifying than the Baylor's incineration explosion. The maggots that emerged from its body would also inherit the characteristics of its host. They would also become explosive items that could be triggered easily. When a blood-armored berserk demon died, the maggots would quickly surge out of its corpse. It would not be long before it turned into a minefield that was about to explode. In order to create a blood-armored berserk demon, each blood-armored demon legion could only conduct a selection once a month. This selection was guaranteed to succeed. However, because Daramar was too unpopular, the blood-armored demons under his command did not have the resolve to die for him. However, whether it was Keyes' appearance as a pit fiend or his courage in facing Buffett alone, the blood-armored fiend approved of him. The selection ceremony went smoothly. All the blood-armored demons signed up enthusiastically, as if they were ready to die for their bosom friends. All the blood-armored demons who signed up emitted special energy waves. Through the ceremony, they communicated with the origin of Bardo. Not long after, the final result was revealed. The energy waves on the other blood-armored demons gradually dissipated, leaving only one blood-armored demon. It was wrapped in red energy like a waterfall. Although it did not grow much taller, its physique had become much stronger. Its tangled and swollen muscles burst through the armor on its body. Every steel nail on its body seemed to have been carefully polished. They had become sharp, and the rust had disappeared. That Minotaur! The guard captain extended his arm and pointed at the target for the blood-armored berserk demon. Is Bardo's great enemy. There was no need for further words. Just the words Bardo's great enemy was enough to drive the blood-armored berserk demon into a frenzy. It wanted to tear apart the Minotaur's body immediately. With a whoosh, the blood-armored berserk demon leapt down from the city wall like an arrow leaving a bow. It broke into a run and ran towards the battlefield. Only after running halfway did it think of using a greater teleportation spell. At this moment, Keyes and Buffett were already engaged in a fierce battle. Clang, 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 in just a moment, the young blue dragon and the beast monarch had clashed several times with their weapons. Sparks kept sputtering outwards, but both sides of the battle were unaffected. Keyes had just picked up the dragon head warhammer that Dalamar had dropped. After testing it a little, he chose to use it as his weapon. The animated warhammer, which would have attacked its master, seemed to have sensed that its user was a powerful true dragon. It became extremely obedient. When Keyes and Buffett clashed with their weapons, the dragon head warhammer would always take the initiative to attack, biting and capturing the opponent's machete. It's really a handy weapon. Trying to communicate with the warhammer in his hand using his psionic ability, the young blue dragon took the initiative to send a compliment as a form of encouragement. After receiving the compliment, the dragon head warhammer worked even harder. When Keys swung it, it even gave its user a hand. Because he used the warhammer with Keys's progress in the Nine-Sword Catalog, he could only use the martial arts of the Stone Dragon sect for the time being. This sect focused on the use of power, and defense relied on the connection with the earth. Stone Dragon sect, immovable mountain. Keys's legs were like cast iron as he stood firmly on the ground. Even though the beast monarch's power couldn't be underestimated, it still couldn't knock him down to the ground with brute force. The recoil from every collision would follow Keys's feet into the ground, and a large number of folds appeared on the ground around him. This was the essence of the Stone Dragon sect's martial arts. First put yourself in an invincible position, then start to defend and counterattack. It coincided with the battle philosophy of some legendary level warriors: focus on offense and defense. Stone Dragon sect, ancient mountain hammer. Knocking away Buffett's machete from bottom to top, Keys used the momentum to raise the dragon head warhammer above his head, and then smashed it down fiercely. Like a falling rock from a landslide, the dragon head warhammer smashed into Buffett's face, but strangely there wasn't the slightest sound of wind. The folds on the ground around him instantly disappeared, like a compressed spring, releasing the accumulated power to assist Keys. Facing the incoming hammer, Buffett didn't have time to block it, so he chose to retreat. The young blue dragon naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. In fact, the Stone Dragon sect also had a corresponding combo technique. Stone Dragon sect, earthquake. Keys's heel slightly lifted and fell, and the ground under his feet seemed to have sensed it, immediately responding to the Stone Dragon warrior's suggestion. The ground suddenly shook, and Buffett, whose center of gravity shifted back, couldn't react in time, and his two hooves staggered. Chapter 421. Bang! Moo! The warhammer accurately hit Buffett's face. The Tauren King's nose was broken, and he instantly let out a tragic howl. Rock dragon style. Bone-crushing force. The terrifying force passed through Keys's dragon head warhammer, not only crushing the flesh, but also the bones in the injured area. This was the secret martial art of the Rock Dragon sect. Its effect was far from as simple as harming the body, especially for a demon lord. Originally, relying on his own body and various self-healing abilities, Buffett could recover quickly even though he was severely injured. However, under the attack of the secret martial art of the Rock Dragon style, he was surprised to find that there seemed to be a special force hindering his recovery. Even though the bleeding had stopped and the bones had healed, the beast monarch's nose was still irreversibly deformed. "What did you do?" Buffett roared angrily. Because of his collapsed nose, his words sounded a little muffled. Keys naturally wouldn't tell him that in order to get rid of this deformed state, he had to cut off the injured area and heal it again. Raising his warhammer, the young blue dragon stepped forward. If he wanted to know why, he just had to take a few more hits. Seeing the enemy approaching, Buffett hurriedly spat out a stream of water full of negative energy in an attempt to stop Keys from attacking at close range. But, because of his collapsed nose, the stream of water he spat out was deflected and perfectly avoided the target. The beast monarch, who was both shocked and angry, raised the machete in his hand. "I will take your life today. Your soul will give me the answer." Rock Dragon style. Giant spirit possession. The dragon head warhammer drew a wide and deadly arc with indescribable power, as if it was being used by a giant, and swung towards Buffett's machete. Among the various martial arts of the Stone Dragon sect that combined both offense and defense, this move, Titanic Spirit Possession, was one of the few offensive techniques that could be used in a wide-open manner. Only a martial arts master who had mastered the rock dragon style could swing his weapon in this way without losing his balance. Keyes practiced the 9-sword catalog diligently every day. Although he didn't become bald, he still became stronger and more familiar with using martial arts technique. Ding! At an ingenious angle, the sharp horn of the dragon head warhammer collided with the blade of the machete, swinging it away from the side. The animated dragon head hammer seemed to understand its master's intentions. It cooperated with him and turned its angle, smashing into Buffett's wrist. With the previous lesson, Buffett immediately turned his arm into adamantine in order to prevent his wrist from being smashed and deformed. In this way, even if Keyes managed to attack the Tauren King's wrist, he would only be able to break open some of the adamantine skin. However, this was enough. Rock dragon style, dragon's tooth. After his arm had turned into adamantine, his agility had been greatly reduced. The stone spikes that suddenly rose from the ground caught him off guard. Under Keyes's control, the tip of the stone spike was not aimed at Buffett's body, but at the handle of the weapon in his hand. Zila, the handle of the machete clashed violently with the adamantine palm, and in the end, the machete was sent flying. Buffett had lost his weapon. Keyes raised the dragon head warhammer, and the animated hammerhead popped out, catching the handle of the machete in the nick of time. Iron Heart style, lightning throw. The warhammer was connected to the machete, and like a strangely shaped flail, it shot towards Buffett's face. The same attack, impossible. The beast monarch raised his adamantine arm to protect his face, but Keyes' attack was not what he thought it would be. The flail did not even touch Buffett's arm. The machete and the dragon head warhammer swayed for a moment, then rushed towards the real target. The horns on top of Buffett's head. The machete, which was ridiculously sharp, fiercely chopped into the original owner's horns, cutting almost half of its depth. The warhammer that came after completed the machete's unfinished work. It smashed into the broken horns and completely broke them. To be honest, this attack did not bring much pain to Buffett, but the humiliation it brought was even greater than before. The Horn King with a broken horn was even more embarrassing for the Demon Lord than the Beast Monarch with a flat nose. "You will die without a doubt." Hot air spurted out from his collapsed nostrils, and Buffett, whose eyes were filled with blood, lowered his head and charged at Quith with his horns extended. Since his opponent did not have a weapon in his hands, he could use his horn to pierce through the body of this abominable pit fiend. However, he did not know that in the 9 Swords manual there was a fighting style that specialized in throwing technique. Keyes had also practiced it before. Twilight Flow, mobile defense. Keyes began to shift, switching from the rock-like rock dragon style footwork to the similarly powerful yet rhythmic Twilight Flow movement. He was in a mysterious yet extremely logical state. Not only did he dodge the Minotaur Monarch's attack, he even found an opportunity to launch a counterattack. Twilight Flow, stellar transposition. One hand tightly gripped Buffett's remaining sharp horn, while the other knocked away his opponent's arm. His fingers dug into the gaps between his ribs, and he twisted his waist and sucked in his abdomen. Keyes led the Minotaur Monarch in a circle, and threw him heavily onto the ground. Just like transplanting rice, half of Buffett's body was planted into the ground of the Acid Fog Canyon. The strength he had just mustered was all converted by Keyes's stellar transposition and used on himself. Of course, even if he did all this, Keyes did not have the upper hand in this battle. In fact, at the same time that he threw the Minotaur Monarch, the young blue dragon had also been kicked by his hoof. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, a muffled sound similar to when a stick hit soaked leather. A large bruise appeared on Keyes' abdomen. The sudden pain made him involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air, and let out a soft hiss. Taking advantage of this moment, Buffett used his silent casting ability to cast a gigantism spell on himself. After his gigantism, the Minotaur Monarch immediately broke free from the ground. He shook his dizzy head slightly, but even so, this demon lord who had experienced hundreds of battles still used a rather rational tactic. Labyrinth. There were no supreme magic techniques, no superfluous spells. As this spell was invented by Buffett, it was almost impossible to be immune to the labyrinth spell. Without exception, Keyes was immediately banished, and temporarily dragged into the endless labyrinth under the Minotaur monarch's jurisdiction. Damned little devil, let me add some seasoning for you. Buffett's labyrinth spell took effect, but he knew that his labyrinth could only trap the enemy temporarily. That crafty pit fiend might have some method to escape quickly. He had to immediately communicate with his own kingdom, and mobilize the various monsters in the endless labyrinth to suppress the banished Keyes. However, you are Bateau's great enemy. Chapter 422. Being suddenly banished by the maze spell was obviously out of Keyes' expectation, but he was not the only one who was shocked on the battlefield. With a howl, the blood-armored berserk demon launched a ferocious attack, catching Buffett off guard. Whoosh! The hell spear cut through the air. Because the machete was not in his hand, the beast monarch could only dodge, but at the same time, he reached out and grabbed the tip of the spear. Bang! Bang! Almost at the same time, the two large monsters used their clenched fists to hit each other. However, Buffett was a demon lord after all, and he had the upper hand in terms of strength. His hooves only took half a step back. The blood-armored mad demon was sent flying, half of his chest had been hammered into mush, and even a few ribs were protruding out, piercing through his skin. Bah! Buffett spat twice and wiped his fist. Then, he raised the spear that he had snatched and threw it at the new opponent with all his might. The hell spear pierced through the blood-armored mad demon and nailed him to the wet and loose ground of the acid fog canyon. I'll grant you death, weak demon. With a disdainful sarcastic remark, Buffett stepped forward, wanting to stomp the enemy who overestimated himself to death. However, the blood-armored mad demon did not struggle. He did not even want to escape. Instead, he opened his arms and tightly hugged Buffett's hoof and thigh that fell heavily on him. The blood-armored mad demon was never afraid of death. In fact, they were even eagerly looking forward to this moment. Because only at this moment, the meaning of this demon's existence could be maximized. Thou art the enemy of Bateau. Even if he coughed up some pieces of his internal organs, the blood-armored mad demon had to say this sentence again. This sentence was very important to him. Haha, are you begging for mercy? Yes, I am the enemy of Bateau, I am the nightmare of the Batsu people. Buffett was not omniscient nor omnipotent. He had never seen the blood-armored mad demon before, so he naturally did not know the temperament of this demon. As he admitted something in a sarcastic tone, he used his hooves to stomp the heart of his defeated opponent into pieces. However, a shocking turn of events suddenly occurred. Under the trampling of the hooves, the blood-armored mad demon had turned into a pile of mush, but the mush once again climbed onto the opponent's body. Like maggots attached to the bone, the mush covered Buffett's body, and some even went into his nostrils and mouth. The beast monarch naturally would not be indifferent. In fact, he had already added a protective layer of negative energy on the surface of his body. However, just as he was about to detonate the negative energy barrier and remove all the rotten flesh, the blood-armored dire fiend's enhanced version of rotten maggot explosion was one step ahead of him. The mush's bodies' bodies' S's. There's of S's of stace. S's success was of his, not a single bit was wasted. Although the sound of the series of explosions was not very deafening, the several feet of land at the center of the explosion was enough to prove how powerful the maggot explosion, after the death of the blood-armored mad demon, was. Even with the beast monarch's strong physique, he still couldn't escape unscathed from such a violent explosion. His strong body was covered in black fur, and smoke kept coming out of it after the explosion. Buffett relied on his strong willpower to support himself and not fall to the ground. "It's finally over. This damned day." The beast monarch's ears were still ringing with the buzzing caused by the explosion, but his mutterings were not obstructed at all and directly reached his slightly shaken heart. Even though he knew that although he was seriously injured, his powerful recovery ability was still working resolutely. He only needed to wait a little longer and he would be able to recover his lost life. Even though he sensed that his beloved machete was actually thrown away not far away, as long as he walked over and picked up his weapon, he would once again have a suffocating combat power. But his heart was trembling. Demons had never been brave. Even a strong demon lord was at most a little more brutal than an ordinary demon. And this was not a rootless duckweed. The more brutal and savage a demon lord was, the more he needed to have the strength to match it. Just now, Buffett deeply felt the threat of death. For a moment, he was really worried that he would fall. Although he was only a clone of the real beast monarch, it was obviously not worth it to waste it in the acid fog canyon. He wanted to retreat. If he didn't retreat now, the blood-armored mad demon's army would probably not give him a chance to recover. Bonita's, Buffett began to summon his mount, wanting to call the colossal bull demon to leave with him. As the creator of Bonita's, he was very clear on how much resources he had spent on the colossal bull demon. It had been heavily injured by the Hydra and lost its heart. At most, it could only fall into a state of suspended animation to protect itself. According to Buffett's estimation, at least half of Bonita's injuries should have disappeared by now. However, he did not receive a reply to his call. Even the unique soul undulations of Bonita's that he could feel just now seemed to have disappeared in an instant. At the same time, in the distance of this battlefield, in an unremarkable suitcase, an alarm clock rang out. With a series of creaking sounds, the Megalosaurus turned from a suitcase into a door, a light blue curtain of light enshrouding it. "You're finally back," Keys, still in his pit fiend form, stepped out of the door. When he had recognized Buffett, the young blue dragon had paid extra attention to prevent him from using the maze spell. After all, the maze spell used by this demon lord was something that even weaker gods could not avoid. However, even though Keys had left accurate spatial coordinates on the Megalosaurus body in advance, and with the help of the natural connection with his own creation, he still had to stay in the endless maze for a while before finding a way out. Fortunately, Keys had returned in time. "Fortunately, you didn't leave." The young blue dragon suddenly smiled at Buffett. "Otherwise, if I sent out an invitation to a feast and didn't prepare enough food in the end, I wouldn't be a good host." As if in response to his words, a loud howl suddenly sounded from the corpse of the colossal bull demon Bonita's. Below not counted in the word count. Thanks to Shoutang 246, Ordovision Radiation, Stargazing 1996, Taishang Shin E, and the Super Fire-Breathing Dragon for their tips. The newbie author once again thanks everyone for their support and love. Chapter 423. The gigantic colossal bull demon turned into food for a group of hungry beasts and died silently on the battlefield of the Acid Fog Canyon. At this moment, Buffett finally understood why his mount didn't respond to his call. Bonita's was dead. As the howl rang out, his muscular body suddenly collapsed. Holes began to appear on the corpse of this powerful Tata re-fiend. The beasts that killed, or devoured, the colossal bull demon's flesh were like moths breaking out of their cocoons, drilling out from the surface of its body. Their bodies were soaked in the filthy demon's blood, and their sharp teeth were exposed as if they were telling what they had just eaten. What was most unacceptable to Buffett was that although these ferocious beasts had dragon-like heads, their bodies seemed to be more like jackals. That was the appearance of creatures he hated the most. For thousands of years, he had even slaughtered countless Knoll tribes with his own hand. The creatures that looked like jackals always reminded him of his old rival, Yeenagu, who was always against Buffett. Could it be that these guys are related to that Knoll? Or could it be that this game is just a scam by Stim? Demons were never afraid to speculate about others with the most vicious thoughts, and the Demon Lord was one of the best. As soon as he saw the Yazzie that looked like a jackal, Buffett began to imagine wildly. He even began to suspect that the god of virtual games, Stim, inviting him here was an important part of another scam, and now he had fallen into the trap of his old rival. Of course, this had nothing to do with keys. The Yazzie was a magical beast that he had indirectly created. It was a powerful monster that was born from the remains of the Leviathan spawn that was killed by the demon worm. As early as a few months ago, after Keys had a fierce battle with Helmuter, the incarnation of the tyrant worm that had descended to the Ash world, he had conveniently thrown it into the abyss to hunt demons. At that time, because of this action, Keys had also received a gift from the Abyss Will, and obtained a treasure that was enough to make the Demon Lord-level demons covet. A few days ago, when he returned to the Acid Fog Canyon Bitwall, he actually felt a familiar call from the unseen world. Moreover, compared to the Yazzie that had been thrown into the abyss before, this magical beast had multiplied into a group. They wandered in the abyss in groups, hunting the Dakri demons all day long and eating them as their own food. Because they had taken root in the abyss, the Yazzie had now evolved into an abyssal creature. The Yazzie's ability to hide all or part of its body in the astral plane had also undergone a corresponding change. It had become a plane covered by the power of chaos, and there was no restriction. This way, even if Stim blocked the Acid Fog Canyon plane and temporarily used it as his own gaming ground, he could not stop quests from summoning the Yazzies in. However, Keys could summon the Yazzie, but it did not mean that he could make them work for him. In fact, except for the first Yazzie beast, which was an indirect creation of the young blue dragon and would spontaneously revere its creator, the other Yazzie could only restrain themselves from attacking Keys under the orders of their ancestors. If he wanted them to be obedient, he had to give them some benefit. As the saying went, the kindness of a meal must be repaid, and the grievance of a Yazzie must be avenged. This was the nature of this race, and Keys naturally knew it. When he saw the seriously injured Panotis lying on the ground, the young blue dragon had a plan in his mind. He began to call the Yazzie to come to the banquet. The appetizer of the banquet was naturally the giant bull demon. After eating this daiquiri, the Yazzie immediately responded more enthusiastically to Keys's orders. After all, by eating powerful demons they did indeed benefit a lot. Stretching out his finger and pointing at Buffett, who was glaring at him, Keys ordered the Yazzie, "That will be your banquet." Hearing this, the Yazzie not only did not resist, but many of them even drooled. The more powerful the demon was, the more to their appetite. Even if the other party was a demon lord, the Yazzie would not back down at all. This was an instinct when facing food. Without any more words, Keys gave the target, and the Yazzie swarmed up and rushed crazily toward Buffett. The beast monarch, who had just recovered from the damage caused by the blood-armored mad demon's maggot explosion and the shock, the latter was more than the former, fell into a great panic again. He could not understand why a monster of the abyss species could ignore the aura of a demon lord and wantonly show its sharp teeth to him. "You jackals who are only fit to eat carrion." A dangerous light flashed in Buffett's eyes. "You are really a damned race." Always paying attention to the game he had set up and observing the process of the game participants fighting for the ultimate overlord, Stim couldn't help but feel a little speechless after seeing the encounter of the nine-headed demon dragon Daramar and the Tauren King Buffett. The two of them were obviously closed beta users. Even if the game was really online, Stim still took care of them. Not only did he arrange for them to develop in relatively good conditions, but they were also not like the commanders in Bateau's camp who had to be harshly exploited at all times and were in a predicament of not being able to make ends meet at all times. But now these two closed beta users were forced to such a state by the same game participant on the same day, One had completely cancelled his game account, and the other was on the verge of being forced to disconnect. If it was for his own benefit, Stim needed to try his best to ensure that Buffett could be the ultimate winner of this game. After all, he had already made a Styx oath before that after the game. He would give the priesthood related to the maze to the beast monarch. At that time, the game's reward and this oath that needed to be fulfilled could be mixed together, and he would be able to pass the game by deceiving his way through. But who would have thought that a talented game participant like Keys would suddenly appear, and his actions, whether it was using a large amount of game gold coins or building a boom town to help him work hard, were actually in line with the core of the priesthood of virtual games. Not only was Stim unable to develop any ill feelings toward him, he even considered whether to give him some small gifts after the game was over. But if he did not deal with Keys now, then after the game was over, he was afraid that he would have to bleed once. The dignified god of virtual games was actually dragged into a dilemma by the game he had set up. Sure enough, mud can't support a wall. Looking at Buffett's current situation, Stim thought helplessly. Chapter 424. Classmate Telemas. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Stym uttered a common greeting in the abyss to express his dissatisfaction with his dilemma. Those new monsters seem to be existences outside the game. Their intrusion has disrupted the balance of the game. Suddenly, he had an idea. He thought of a way to weaken Keys without violating his priesthood. Banishing those monsters will affect the balance of the game. Just as Stym was about to put his idea into practice, an obscure yet unprecedentedly powerful will suddenly descended. The will of the abyss. In a split second, the dwarf god's heart shook violently. He really did not expect, and was even more unwilling to think, that he would one day be watched by the true ruler of the bottomless abyss. Now, Stym only had the intention to banish Yazzie, but he was warned before he could actually carry it out. If he really did banish Yazzie, it might trigger the hostility of the will of the abyss, as well as crazy and vicious revenge. No one dared to underestimate the will born from the origin of the bottomless abyss, not even the gods with great divine power. The chaotic and evil power contained in the bottomless abyss could even trace back to the incarnations of the gods and directly destroy their divine kingdom. Moreover, in order to set up a game that encompassed an entire plane, Stym had now descended into the bottomless abyss with his original body. The will of the abyss only had to think, and the demons living in the various planes of the abyss would come in droves to fight Stym to the death in an endless stream. In fact, in order to gain the favor of the will of the abyss, those powerful demon lords might even come for a share of the pie. Stym knew that he was not that stubborn, and his small body could not withstand the ravages of the various big bosses of the bottomless abyss. Fortunately, he came to his senses in time. In fact, the moment the will of the abyss appeared, all the demon lords of the bottomless abyss had a realization at the same time. They could feel that in the power of the origin of the abyss, a strong will to destroy something had already taken shape. If Stym had not stopped his actions in time and repeatedly showed weakness to that will, perhaps many powerful demon lords would have already walked out of the portal and sent their final greetings to him. After all, destroying a god that the will of the abyss viewed as an enemy, and this god wasn't that powerful, was too tempting for the demon lords who dreamed of becoming demon princes. A strong sense of defeat, an inexplicable sense of grievance, suppressed anger, all sorts of emotions surged in Stim's heart. A god who was in charge of games could not even adjust the balance of the game. What were those monsters that looked like dragon-headed jackals? Were they related to the investors? Of course, complaining was just complaining. Now, even if Hierony's courage was transplanted into Stim's body, he would not dare to make a move against Yazzie. He didn't even dare to think about it. However, why would the will of the abyss protect a creature like Yazzie? This was actually related to the great wish they had made at the beginning of their birth. The Yazi was born from a derivative of Leviathan that had been devoured by a demon worm. They were born to take revenge on the demon. The ultimate goal of all the Yazis was the same. They wanted to devour all the demons in the bottomless abyss as much as possible. In the current bottomless abyss, although the demons of Tana-Re were prosperous, their existence itself was extremely contradictory. Especially those demon lords. Even if they ruled their own kingdoms with evil and violence, a kingdom was a kingdom. The emergence of classes meant the invasion of the power of order. And the more powerful a demon lord was, the longer they could rule, and the more solidified the classes in their kingdoms. As the origin of chaos and evil, the will of the bottomless abyss naturally hated any order, even those demon lords who were favored by it. The appearance of the Yazi seemed to be a correction of the power of chaos against the power of order for the bottomless abyss. Although they wanted to devour all the demons and destroy the demon race, what did that have to do with the will of the abyss? Demons, the old playthings of the will of the abyss, had actually been abandoned by it. And destruction, even if the target was a demon, the will of the abyss appreciated this behavior. That was why the will of the abyss deliberately took care of the Yazi and gave them the ability of chaotic transition to facilitate their predation on demons. Stim had previously thought that the sudden transition to the plane of the acid fog canyon was a kind of violation of the rules of the game. They had to be expelled to maintain the balance of the game. However, it was precisely this idea of his that led to the arrival of the will of the abyss. Because he thought that the Yazi could not and should not appear in the plane of the acid fog canyon, this idea in itself was a denial of the will of the abyss. This dwarf god had actually been on the blacklist of the bottomless abyss, and countless conspiracies had already been created around him. Although the will of the abyss seemed to have calmed down now, no matter what Stim did, he was actually taking a step forward on the road of destruction. Unless he immediately fled the bottomless abyss and found a place where the power of order flourished to seek refuge, the outcome of his destruction was already set. Stim was still too young. Even though he had lived for some years as a god, he still could not understand the nature of the bottomless abyss. He did not escape immediately. He was still paying attention to his game, trying to use a more reasonable method to deal with the problem. Yazi, this kind of person who has relations with the abyss, cannot be targeted at the moment. With his legs crossed, Stim half reclined on the throne of his tyrant worm palace. He pointed at the few screens in front of him. But those worm demons of the neutral camp are also products of the bottomless abyss. There's nothing wrong with strengthening them. Moreover, Stim suddenly thought of something. After farming in the wilderness for so long, the players have not encountered the great dragon yet. Perhaps its hiding place is too remote. I have to give them a reminder. Moreover, the progress of the game is too slow at the moment. If we give those players who have the talent for farming too much time to develop, won't they flatten everything in the end? That won't do. We have to force them to encounter each other in the early stages and compete fiercely with each other, add a poisoned circle. After all, the god of virtual games was the god of virtual games. As long as Stim was willing to think, he could come up with countless new ideas on how to improve the game every second. Dragon, poison circle. Many ideas were born in his mommy Lai's little head. As for the specific operation, time halt, Stim used his divine power to cast his psionic ability. All the creatures in the Overlord game were suddenly frozen for a day. Except for the Yazi that he deliberately ignored, and the young blue dragon that was obviously related to it. This also caused Buffett, who was fighting with the Yazi, to suddenly become motionless under Keys's surprised gaze. Chapter 425. To others, Stim's psychic ability could perfectly fulfill his wishes, but not to a demon lord. In fact, Buffett quickly broke free from the effect of time stop, but it still took him half an hourglass to do so. And this was undoubtedly fatal, especially when he was facing a group of hungry Yazis, and the young blue dragon, who wouldn't let go of any opportunity. Despicable and shameless dwarf. This king of beasts didn't have a single piece of good flesh left. Dense scars covered his entire body. That was the result of the Yazis' gnawing and the demon lord's strong recovery. What made him even more terrified was that his own machete that had the effect of stopping his wounds from healing was now stuck in his chest. A big hole was torn in his heart. Dong dong dong. Keys, who was unforgiving, had already put Buffett on the ground. He held the remaining bullhorn in his hand and swung the dragon head war hammer, continuously hammering on the huge bull head. The Yazi beasts buried their heads. Some continued to gnaw on the king of beasts' limbs, tearing apart his tendons that were constantly healing. Some aimed at his abdomen and the rat's throat, picking the softer parts to bite. To be honest, this was the first time Buffett felt that his super regenerative ability and his strong spiritual power that could quickly break free from the effect of Stim's psychic ability were a complete mistake. As a strong demon lord, from the moment he was born, he had always been the one who took the initiative to torture his opponent. Only this time, he was pressed on the ground by the enemy and tortured back and forth inhumanely. That feeling was worse than death. It wasn't that Buffett didn't think of resisting, but his tendons were constantly being torn apart by the Yazi. His muscles couldn't even muster up any strength. He wanted to use spells, even those that were as simple as eating and drinking, under Key's relentless hammering and casting physical stun. He couldn't even form a complete thought. Other than when he just broke free from the effect of time stop, Buffett cursed Stim. After that, he couldn't even speak a complete sentence. However, Keys was equally depressed. Why is this guy's head so hard? Even though the young blue dragon had amazing physical strength, when he smashed half an hourglass with the hammer like a pile driver, the recoil from the hammer still made his wrist feel a little sore. The only thing that made Quest gratified was that due to his continuous beating and the Yazi beast horde's continuous devouring, Buffett's body was constantly shrinking, even though he had a heaven-defying physical body recovery ability. As his body healed again and again, this evil demon lord's body was constantly shrinking. This beast monarch's body had already changed from the size of a small mountain to the size of an ordinary minotaur. Thinking of the opportunity to personally hammer and kill a demon lord, Keys's heart was once again ignited with motivation to support the work at hand. Nothing in this world is difficult, the young blue dragon encouraged himself. However, the next moment, he turned the already sluggish minotaur and warned fiercely, "As long as you are willing to give up." Like a sudden clap of thunder, Buffett, who had closed his eyes and stopped listening, suddenly understood something. His crooked mouth revealed a mocking smile. Giving up is, indeed, a good idea. Immediately after, the tormented beast monarch, Incarnation's eyes suddenly swelled, and his eyeballs began to spin. Damn, it can even work like this. Because he was worried that something unexpected would happen, Keys couldn't help but speed up the hammering in his hand. More and more collapsed marks appeared on Buffett's hard skull. Pfff. The dragon head hammer smashed into one of the Minotaur King's eyes, but this eyeball didn't burst. Instead, it fell off with a rolling sound and was firmly embedded in the dragon's mouth of the hammerhead. Furthermore, Buffett's other eye seemed to have popped out of its socket due to the force of the hammer being transmitted. Keys reached out to stop it, but this escaping eyeball immediately sped up and escaped the young blue dragon's grasp in a flash. After losing both of his eyes, Buffett's physical body suddenly collapsed. Even the muscles that were already in the mouths of the Yazi beasts began to turn into lumps of smelly bubbles. Soul imprisonment. Keys was actually quite familiar with some of the tricks of the demons, so he immediately launched a spell to stop Buffett's soul. At least, he couldn't let this beast monarch escape so easily. However, although the spell was effective, it didn't have any effect. The demon lord's soul had already escaped this domain. That eyeball. Immediately realizing where the problem was, Keyes immediately stood up and wanted to intercept Buffett's escaping eyeball. But at this moment, a thunderbolt suddenly fell from the sky of the acid fog canyon plain, and the sound of glass breaking abruptly rang out. With his superior vision, Keyes saw that the eyeball that was the size of an ordinary person's fist suddenly disappear into a black hole that suddenly appeared. It turned out that Buffett had indeed chosen to give up in the end. He used his demon lord incarnation to sacrifice to the bottomless abyss. The will of the abyss immediately gave this Minotaur king feedback and helped him tear apart the fence that Stim had set up. There is nothing difficult in this world, as long as you are willing to give up. I told you to give up resisting, not to give up this incarnation. The self-deprecating words sounded in Keyes's mind. The young blue dragon frowned and raised the dragon head hammer in his hand. Buffett's eye that was embedded in the hammerhead had also lost its vitality. It was like a black jade that was held in the mouth of the ferocious dragon head. I offended another demon lord. Keyes helplessly shrugged his shoulders. I only got a hammer in exchange, what a loss! Experiencing the frustration of its owner, the dragon head hammer suddenly made a buzzing sound, as if it wanted to prove itself. Following its noise, the machete that was stuck straight into the ground because Buffett's physical body had disappeared suddenly bounced up. The machete spun and slashed towards Keyes. The young blue dragon thought that this was the beast monarch's backup plan, and hurriedly raised his hammer to block. However, this machete wasn't actually attacking. At the last moment when it came into contact with the dragon head hammer, it took the initiative to pass the hilt over. With a soft ding, the hilt was caught by the animated hammer, and once again formed a strange shape of a flail. All right, I didn't get a hammer, but a second-hand flail that doesn't even look good. The animated hammerhead twisted its neck, and the machete suddenly disappeared into the Buffett's eye in its mouth. It turned its head and looked at its user with sad eyes, as if it was questioning Keyes. What right do you have to despise me? However, Keyes didn't pay attention to it at this moment, because the Yazi beast herd had already surrounded it in the center. They didn't want to attack, but the Yazi ancestor that was indirectly created by the young blue dragon came out of the crowd, holding two of Buffett's horns in its mouth and excitedly asking for credit. Well done, keep up the good work. Keyes stroked the Yazi ancestor's head with satisfaction to show his encouragement. The dragon head hammer was jealous. Chapter 426. After waiting for a long time, the game notification still didn't sound. Obviously, Stim didn't approve of Keyes's action of defeating Buffett. The reward must have been cheated. Keyes, who never had any hope for the character of game developers, couldn't help but secretly complain. However, now was not the time to reason with Stim, and the young blue dragon didn't have the strength to argue with the gods. Fortunately, after this powerful demon lord was killed, some things were left behind. The machete, broken horns, Buffett's eye, and the graveyard that it had used before. These things were now all ownerless. Stim was too lazy to deal with them, so they were abandoned on the battlefield for Keyes to pick up. The graveyard can be left to Snader to deal with, and the horns of the Tauren King can also be used as materials for some magic items, but the machete and Buffett's eye have now become part of the hammer. It's really a pity. Although Keyes had used the dragon head warhammer as his weapon in the battle just now, it was indeed quite convenient for him to use it. But the young blue dragon was actually very clear that he had completely exposed his identity as a megalosaurus in front of the demon lord. Otherwise, transforming into a dragon's body would be a better way to fight and more suitable for facing a strong enemy. And when he transformed back into a megalosaurus, using a hammer as a weapon, it would really be like playing with a hammer, and it would most likely be a burden. Even a small hammer would be good. It could also be used when repairing the megalosaurus. It's a pity that such a good material would be wasted. Looking at the dragon head warhammer, Keyes couldn't help but think of the fine gold longsword that he had left behind in the Ash world. That weapon was carefully made by the ogre weapon master, Neru. Because it could no longer keep up with the young blue dragon's explosive strength, it had been reduced to a training tool. Compared to the fine gold longsword, the dragon head warhammer in front of him was undoubtedly made of better material. This could be seen from the fact that it didn't suffer any damage when it clashed with the demon lord's weapon. It was really a pity to let it sit idle and eat dust all year round. However, Keyes had no way to give it to his companions. After all, he could feel that the dragon head warhammer had become a living creature. If it did not recognize the user, it would launch a merciless counterattack. As if sensing the will of its wielder, the dragon head warhammer seemed to have made up its mind. It began to vibrate with a buzzing sound. The incomparably hard hammerhead was now like mercury that could be molded at will, easily changing its appearance. "Small hand hammer," Keyes exclaimed in surprise. Then, the dragon head warhammer changed again. Wrench, screwdriver, pliers, and hydraulic file, chisel, the dragon head warhammer that constantly transformed itself into various metalworking items indeed delighted Keyes. And its constant transformation to cater to his needs made Keyes wonder if he had also encountered an erodes. Of course, this change was good and acceptable. It could be beneficial to some of Keyes's future plans. Therefore, Keyes was not stingy with his praise at this time. "What an amazing ability! It seems that I will have to use a versatile tool like you more often in the future." "It's just that." The young blue dragon hesitated for a moment and decided to remind the dragon head warhammer. "Pragmatism is the first principle. Although the multiverse is indeed a superficial society, as a tool, the patterns you just transformed into are too complicated." Once again, the dragon head warhammer acutely understood the intention of its wielder. It began to become simple and unadorned. Finally, it turned into a hard-headed hammer that could be seen in any blacksmith shop. Nodding with satisfaction, Keyes did not put this weapon into his spatial equipment. Instead, he hung it on his belt and carried it with him. On the inconspicuous corner of the hard-headed hammer, a small dragon head opened its mouth and revealed a satisfied smile. After dealing with his gains from the battle with Buffett, Keyes bade farewell to the excited Yazzie beasts and promised them that he would summon them in time if there was such a meal opportunity in the future. The Yazzie beasts that received the promise thanked the young blue dragon one after another. Then, they used the Chaos Transition ability to leave the Acid Fog Canyon. In addition, Keyes also needed to take over the demon fortress that had been assigned to him. However, when he saw that the blood-armored demons stationed in the fortress had fallen into a daze, he realized that the entire Acid Fog Canyon plain was shrouded in an inexplicable energy. "This is Time Halt." After carefully identifying it for a while, he used the knowledge from the inheritance of the great sage of gizmos to recognize the super-large range of psionic ability that Stim had used. He could not help but sigh at this dwarf god's generosity. An ordinary psionic warlock could affect hundreds or thousands of people, which was already the limit. However, this god could actually use his own will to distort the time flow of an entire plane. It was really amazing. Why am I not affected? Keyes suddenly thought. And if it's because I also have the psionic ability and thus have a strong resistance to this kind of influence, then why are those Yazzie beasts not affected? Although the young blue dragon did not know that this was actually the result of the mediation of the super big boss, the will of the abyss, Keyes did not dwell on this question for too long. Because he immediately thought of another question: what is Stim doing this for? Keyes definitely did not believe that this dwarf god would use up so much divine power on a whim. That god of virtual games, he is stopping the server for an update. The young blue dragon made his own judgment based on the experience of his previous life. Perhaps it was because I defeated Buffett that caused Stim to have no choice but to do this. But what will he update? One question after another, like a ball of tangled hemp that had lost its thread, stuffed into Quessa's mind. Perhaps it was the forward-looking wisdom of a creature like the Megalosaurus that caused him to give up on these questions in the end. Instead, he turned his thoughts to some more practical matters that needed to be solved urgently. After all, no matter what arrangements Stim had, it was actually his business. The best response was to make comprehensive preparations. Looking at the motionless demon fortress in front of him, Keyes thought quickly. A map marked with the various forces gradually formed in his mind. Suddenly, a burst of inspiration welled up in his mind. He looked at the clockwork Megalosaurus that was also in a state of stillness. The young blue dragon suddenly had an idea. Chapter 427. Stim's game update was announced to be completed in just one day, and all general flag holders received the notification at the same time. It was still the same familiar notification sound. Ding! The Overlord's glory has been updated and has resumed normal operation. All general flag holders, please take note that the game has changed as follows. A new mechanism has been added, Tide of Worms. After a period of recuperation, the tyrant worm that once ruled the plain of Acid Fog Canyon has returned. He will lead an uncountable number of worms and attack every commander's camp at random. Commanders can choose to stand their ground, but I don't recommend it. The tyrant worm is so angry, and its swarm is so hungry, so those commanders who choose to stand their ground will face more and more worms every once in a while. A more rational choice is actually to advance toward the final circle, which is the vicinity of the tyrant worm's palace in the Shattered Canyon. As the god of virtual games, I assure you that the tide of worms will only devour the commander's camp at the outermost perimeter. However, as you advance toward the final circle, the chances of you encountering each other will greatly increase, and this will undoubtedly make this competition more exciting. If you obtain enough general flags, you can even try to gather your forces and challenge the tyrant worm. Anyone who succeeds in the challenge will obtain the tyrant worm's treasure and plan a tide of worms against a competitor. Please believe me, this will definitely make it easier to become the Overlord. After listening to the lengthy and detailed introduction, all general flag holders in Acid Fog Canyon took action. No one would sit still and wait for death. Buffett, who represented the forces of the bottomless abyss, had already left the game early. Other than the tyrant worm of the neutral camp, the other commanders were all great demons from the 9 prisons of Bader. As warlords, they joined the Blood War in order to obtain more benefits. It could be said that every Batsu commander was an expert in strategy and tactics, and had countless battle experience. However, these great demons had long been in the military system of Bader, and had long been used to relying on sturdy walls and reliable troops. When faced with Stim's friendly notification, they were even more used to seeing it as a trap. That guy definitely doesn't have good intentions. It's most likely that he wants to lure us out of the stronghold, and then take us down one by one. This was the first instinct of many Batsu commanders, and their deduction that Stim was up to no good was correct. Thus, apart from a few great demons with smaller armies and strongholds that were practically undefended, the other Batsu commanders all chose to defend their strongholds. Their reverse thinking their actions. As for the weaker Batsu commanders, they began to form unreliable alliances. Of course, such an alliance with the demons would at most guarantee that they wouldn't stab each other in the back. Other than that, it was better than nothing. You bunch of lazy bastards, hurry up and leave. Otherwise, I'll demote all of you to lowly inferior devils. Barbarian was a mighty pit fiend, but he was still very young. Before coming to Acid Fog Canyon, he'd just celebrated his 20,000th birthday. Counting from the time he'd fallen into the 9 hells, he'd used less than 20,000 years to rise from an ordinary petitioner to a pit fiend. He could be said to have extraordinary talent, and his progress was godly. To him, life in the 9 prisons of Bader was like a fish in water. However, it was precisely because he was too young that he lacked some accumulation. The number of troops under his command wasn't that great. The other Batsu commanders were mostly lords of Batsu who had their own land in Bader, and Barbarian was just an amateur. Stim's notification had just ended, and this crafty great devil contacted a group of amateur commanders in the expeditionary army that he was familiar with. They discussed an offensive and defensive alliance. Our forces are relatively weak, so we must unite and deal with this sudden crisis together. Tomorrow we will join forces. You may choose to enter my reef stronghold, and its authority will be open to all of you. I, the commander of the 9 prisons of Bader, swear to the Great Styx that all the resources in the reef stronghold will be shared with all of you tomorrow. This was Barbarian's promise to the other leaders of the smaller warlords. However, the moment the alliance was formed, he immediately ordered his troops to set out, leaving an empty city for his allies. Of course, he left behind a lesser demon, combined troops, a broken shield, resource sharing, and open all permissions, directly removing all the magic restriction and taking away the resources after collecting them. Haha, what an offensive and defensive alliance. Barbarian had been able to become a pit fiend in less than 20,000 years, relying on the framework of the laws to constantly screw over his allies. He had no qualms about this at all. As for whether or not his allies would settle the score with him in the future, that would have to wait until they dealt with the worm tide. The long caravan moved forward quickly, leaving behind deep wheel marks on the loose ground of the acid fog canyon. The devils in charge of pulling the carts not only had to struggle to drag them along, they also had to turn back from time to clean up the ground. That fish face is spitting bubbles again. Hearing Barbarian's reprimand, a spiked devil thought to himself in disdain. There were many devils who shared the same attitude as him. Fish Face was the nickname the devils had given Barbarian. While Barbarian had advanced quickly due to his young age, he still retained some of the characteristics of his original race. He'd been to a few material planes where the sea was the main focus, and had seen the Sharkmen race. They'd given him the name Fish Face. Of course, most of the devils only mocked him in secret. Anyone who dared to call him that, apart from the Devil Duke they'd sworn loyalty to, was already dead. The spiked devil pulling the carts left the carts by the side of the road, using its teleportation ability to return to the back of the caravan. It then followed the tracks of the carts, using its spiked claws to kick at them. "Do you need help?" A sentence in Infernal suddenly rang out in the spiked devil's ears. However, the tone was rather strange, and it couldn't help but look towards the source of the voice. Command, intimidate. The sudden activation of the spell left the spiked devil unable to dodge, and he was instantly dumbstruck. Chapter 428. The skies of the Acid Fog Gorge were filled with thick smoke. From the direction it was coming from, it seemed like the submerged reef stronghold had been burnt down. "The tide of worms," Basaro muttered to himself as he gazed at his former stronghold. At the same time, he felt proud of his wise decision. The reduced visibility did not affect the vision of the devils. This group hurriedly moved forward, not stopping for even a moment. Standing up from his carriage, the pit fiend brought a few of his blood-armored bodyguards to the back of the convoy. "They're still moving too slowly. I have to remind these lazy bastards. Find a spike devil and demote it." Basaro pondered. He thought of a way to motivate his subordinates, and was about to put it into action immediately. However, perhaps today was the lucky day of an unlucky spike devil. The pit fiend commander's plan did not come to fruition. Bang. At the front of the convoy, a huge rock suddenly flew through the air, smashing into a barbed devil scout and turning it into minced meat. The entire convoy immediately stopped in their track. All the devils took up their weapons on their own accord, leaning against the carriages to get into a defensive formation. Basaro, who had just chosen a spike devil and had yet to make a move, immediately teleported into the center of the defensive circle with his bodyguard. There seemed to be only one boulder that was thrown over, and there were no more boulders that came flying over. Basaro had originally thought that it was an alliance that was preparing to ambush him midway, but the current situation did not seem like something the devils would do. Could it be that bastard Taz trying to rob us? The Pit Fiend commander thought of this possibility, and could not help but be speechless. In a land of chaos and evil, anything can happen. Actually, this could not be blamed on him. After all, robbing a Batsu army was too outrageous. Even if this army only had a mere 100 devils, it was not something a small group of demons could match up to. Besides, demons were chaotic by nature, and most of them would not be able to commit crimes in group. It was most likely that they would act alone. However, what happened next made Basaro feel even more astonished. What demon bandits? It was clearly just a few trolls. Who gave them the courage to attack him? Basaro's interest in his opponents was piqued. He could not even be bothered to give orders, and only glanced at his blood-armored bodyguards. Get rid of those who block the way. The blood-armored demon bodyguard captain roared. The barbed demons who were acting as scouts rushed out. Although they didn't feel sorry for the death of one of their comrades, they were still prepared to use the cruelest methods to deal with the ogres to prove the strength of their race. After all, a useful devil was a good devil. It's been a while. Blue the ogre patted his brother on the shoulder. As usual, I'll attack first, then you attack. Nalu nodded. Brew opened his gourmet box and picked out a handful of iced mint leaf. He tossed them into his mouth and started chewing. The cold sensation stimulated the gourmet's mouth and taste buds. It resonated with his keen senses. Frost breath. He patted his belly, and a gust of cold wind burst out, howling as it enveloped the demon scout that was charging over. Then, as if he had thought of something, Brew stuffed some more pepper seeds into his mouth. The slight numbness stimulated the tip of his tongue. Ma Bai Chi eat paralyzing gaze. All the barbed demon scouts who made eye contact with Brew were instantly affected. Their movements became sluggish and deformed. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Blue the ogre, who couldn't hold back his desire for battle, pounced on the enemy in front of him. Nalu didn't use ebony spikes. Instead, he held 2 steam-repeating crossbows in each hand and began his frenzied slaughter. Ordinary people couldn't even lift the steam-repeating crossbows with both arms. However, in the hands of the ogre, who was much larger than his peers, they were like small handguns. It was effortless for him to hold one in each hand. Steam gushed out of the small steam boiler. Not only did it pull the bowstring taut, but it also rotated the rotating wheel that acted as the magazine. Do-do-do. 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 Nalu only needed to aim. As long as he pulled the trigger, the steam-repeating crossbow would fire continuously until the magazine was exhausted. In order to deal with the lower world creatures more effectively, the arrowheads of the crossbow were plated with a layer of shiny silver. Puff. 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 One had to admit that the seemingly reckless Nalu had an astonishing talent in using all sorts of weapons, even if they were shooting weapons. He didn't even need to aim carefully. Based on his intuition, most of the arrows would hit the barbed devil scouts in the face. Some of them even pierced the eyes of the enemy. The steam boiler and the silver plating of the arrowheads caused the rough skin of the barbed devil scouts to be as white as paper. These devils that didn't have the right to wear cold steel armor fell to the ground one after another. Even if they were just despicable barbed devils, Basaro couldn't remain indifferent. His shark-like face was even more sinister. All troops attack. Having said that, the Pit Fiend commander raised his serrated blade and teleported to the front of the formation in an instant. He viciously slashed at the ogre Nalu. Voodoo, slime trap. The ogre shaman Palu waved his newly repaired troll's skull staff as he saw the situation and immediately went to support his brother. Viscous liquid spurted out of the troll's skull's eye holes. The pit fiends were flanked on both sides, causing them to hesitate. Fireball! Basaro used his spell-like ability, attempting to use a fireball to blast away the slime in front of him. However, he was still a step too late. A puddle of slime still managed to get onto his serrated blade. The brown slime soaked Basaro's palm, and his straight slash became stiff. The slightest mistake could make a huge difference. He slashed diagonally in front of Nalu, but didn't injure him in the slightest. Asterisk bang. Asterisk at some point, the ogre had tossed the steam-repeating crossbow in his hands to the ground and replaced it with an ebony chain. He stabbed it right in front of Basaro's shark-like face. The Pit Fiend commander's nose caved in, blood and broken teeth splattering in all directions. His huge body fell backward. "Hurry up and support the commander!" A strange infernal voice rang out beside Basaro. He glanced at it from the corner of his eye. It was a spike devil expressing his loyalty. "I'll recommend this fellow to the promotion ceremony later," the Pit Fiend commander thought to himself. Chapter 429. Just as Basaro was considering adding a drumstick to a certain discerning spike demon in the future, something unexpected happened. Maximum spell, Soul Shackle. Maximum spell, Amber Seal. Turning himself into a spiked fiend, the demonic Snade easily approached his target. He extended his spiked arm and pointed at the Pit Fiend commander with lightning speed. As a creature of the lower realm who had soul and body as one, Basaro was affected by the soul imprisonment spell. His body immediately became stiff, and his entire body revealed a gray color. The amber seal strengthened this effect, and a large amount of pale yellow liquid appeared around the greater devil's body. They quickly fused with each other, and soon formed a sealed hole that firmly trapped the Pit Fiend. Snade then transformed back into his original form. All the devils present, including the Pit Fiend trapped in the amber crystal, looked at this mechanical humanoid creature made of gears and springs with astonishment. Unlike a country bumpkin who judged a book by its cover, the Batsu devil could see through the souls of living beings. They could see the dense aura of death on the steampunk half-lich's body, as well as an extremely dense mana. This is a strange-looking half-lich. Many of the more knowledgeable devils came to the same conclusion. First, the three ogre brothers had pretended to rob him, and then Snade, who'd been hidden in the devil's army, had decisively used a spell to ambush the commander while Basaro was brandishing his blade. In the end, the three ogre brothers and the steampunk half-lich had successfully accomplished their goal, and captured a Pit Fiend. "I'll take over this army when I return." Snade's mechanical prosthesis drew a circle, and a portal that was sizzling with sparks was suddenly formed. Then, he hurried to summon Neru, who still wanted to slaughter Fish-Face Barasa's army. After all, the target he'd captured was no small matter. He couldn't be sure how long his amber seal would be able to imprison the Pit Fiend. If there were any mishaps midway, the most important part of Kiza's plan would be delayed for a while. Fortunately, Blue and Palu were present. While Nalu might not have paid attention to the half-lich's instructions, he was always willing to listen to his brother's advice. What was even more fortunate was that Snade had underestimated the effects of his spell. The Pit Fiend that was trapped in the amber seal was unable to break free in the end. Like a frozen fish on a chopping board, Basaro was finally delivered to Keys without a hitch. This scene was very similar to when the young blue dragon had subdued the half-lich. It was a pity that the Pit Fiend's outcome was different. In Kartha's plan, the Pit Fiend was just a tool. What he coveted was the wishing spell that could be used once a year. "Hammer," Keys called out, calling out the new name he'd given to the warhammer, "turn into a saw blade. Make it as sharp as possible." Upon receiving the order, Hammer immediately followed its master's instructions and turned into a long saw. The teeth of the saw glinted with a faint blue light. Dangerous captives needed to be kept in check. If he wanted to restrain the Pit Fiend, Keys had to be even more prepared. Without opening Basaro's seal, Keys took hammer and began to chisel away at the amber crystal. He sawed off the pit fiend's long horn, then cut open its skull and performed a craniotomy on Basaro. As the patient undergoing the operation, the archdevil didn't have any anesthesia. His skull was opened by Keys while he was conscious. He carefully inserted a music box, a clockwork megalosaurus that was in a state of mechanical fusion, into Basaro's brain. After repeatedly confirming the pit fiend's condition, Keys used the adhesive prepared by Palu and a healing spell to complete the operation. Keys then chanted an amber seal to dispel the curse. The hard amber crystal melted in an instant, flowing to the ground. "What did you put in my head?" Basaro immediately asked as soon as he was freed. Since he'd just regained consciousness, the pit fiend knew very well what the young blue dragon had implanted in his brain. He didn't dare to attack Keys for the time being, nor did he dare to casually use a greater teleportation spell. "It's nothing," Keys smiled. "I just need your help, and it's not even worth mentioning." He then used his psionic powers to project the power of the clockwork megalosaurus self-destruction into Basaro's mind, letting the pit fiend know that he could blow apart his skull at any time. As the most powerful Batsu devil, the pit fiend's physique and regenerative abilities were strong enough to suffocate mortals. However, no matter how strong they would still die tragically if their brains were blown apart. Moreover, due to his physique and recovery ability, the process of death would be infinitely prolonged. Even though the abyss wasn't like Bador, where devils had a certain chance of survival after death, having their brains damaged and then being reborn in Bador meant that a drop in power was inevitable. Basaro didn't want to die, nor did he want to drop in power. When he heard Keys' words, he hurriedly asked in an attempt to negotiate. "Who are you, and what do you want me to do? If you can capture a pit fiend alive, what else can stop you?" The pit fiend unknowingly used the devil's speech technique again, even though his life was now in Keys' hands. His questions were specious, containing many facts that he'd already guessed. He just wanted to get confirmation from the young blue dragon. However, Keys had read Kunini's notes, and had a deep understanding of how devils thought. Basaro's little trick couldn't fool the young blue dragon. "You really are a devil." Keys seemed to shrug his shoulders helplessly, but he still spoke bluntly to Basaro. "I just have a small wish, and I need you to help me fulfill it." The pit fiend furrowed his brows, because he thought of the hidden meaning in Keys' words. "You need me to use a wishing spell?" He clapped his hands with a smile, and the curtains next to the experiment table slowly opened. A huge device filled with brass pipes and hydraulic plugs, made by Keys himself, appeared in front of Basaro. Chapter 430. I need you to use the wishing spell. Looking straight into Basaro's eyes, the young blue dragon gave his command. He snapped his fingers, and the pit fiend could hear the sound of gears grinding in his brain. "If you dare to object, misinterpret, or mislead me, the device in your brain has been activated, and you can go boom at any time." The threat was self-evident. In truth, the reason Keys wanted to kidnap a pit fiend was because these devils had the wishing spell. The wishing spell was one of the most powerful spells in the common schools of thought, and those who could grasp its essence were as few as the morning stars. If this spell was used in battle, and if used properly, it could even kill a Taraski. However, very few people would do so, because using the wishing technique in battle was, to use a word to describe it, simply a reckless waste of natural resources. Ordinary spellcasters who wanted to use this spell not only had to use up an astronomical amount of materials, they also had to deliberate for a long time, trying their best to come up with a wish that did not contain any loopholes. For a pit fiend, it was much easier for them to use the wishing spell. This was a spell they were born with. They could only use it once a year, and most of them would only reluctantly use the wishing spell that was full of loopholes when summoned by mortal spellcasters. However, there was no doubt that the pit fiends were experts in this field. Even in the entire multiverse, there was no creature that could surpass the pit fiends when it came to the success rate of the wishing spell. Keyes and his magic consultant, the Demolic Snade, could use the wishing spell, but they still could not compare to the pit fiends. I need you to make a wish for this engine to be able to operate normally for at least 100 years without damaging the strength of the materials. At the same time, the increase cannot be less than 50% of its original efficiency. The young blue dragon stated his request in a concise manner, and then explained the technical parameters in detail to Basaro. However, the pit fiend was still confused. He could only guess that Keyes was preparing some sort of secret weapon. In fact, there was nothing wrong with saying that, because once this engine worked properly, with sufficient power, the Bator fortress under Kitha's control could become a Toad City. A few days ago, the young blue dragon had moved all of Boomtown's personnel and resources to the newly conquered fortress. After emptying the warehouses of the 9-headed demon dragon and the burnt sacrifice demon, Keyes built a giant platform with crawlers. Then, the craftsmen in the army worked together to reinforce the stronghold. Finally, the stronghold was placed on the moving platform. The only thing that was lacking was a powerful enough engine. Similar to the Clockwork Dragon, the engine built by Kith would not be able to withstand the weight of the mobile platform and Bator Fortress if it was not improved. It was just for show. In the beginning, Keyes flipped through Stim's exchange list, looking for a replacement engine. But even if there were some of Moradin's creations, none of them could make Fort Bader move freely. He had no choice but to change his train of thought and start improving the existing engine. Fortunately, this was a world with magic. In a situation where all his attempts were ineffective, Keyes decisively chose to use a wishing spell, directly improving the engine's efficiency from a conceptual level. I wish. Baylor began to speak. Under the joint supervision of the young blue dragon and the Demolic, Barasa had no choice but to recite the specific contents of his wish. The two powerful spellcasters who were proficient in the language of Inferno checked every word of the great devil's words to prevent him from carrying any personal information. There were no dazzling rays of light, nor was there any deafening sound. When the pit fiend used its annual spell-like ability, only obscure magic waves lingered in the air for a long time. Unlike mortal spellcasters, the pit fiend's spell-like ability would definitely succeed if it was not countered. In just a few breaths' time, the engine began to change. The brass pipes began to distort and become thicker. Gaskets to increase airtightness appeared at the joints of the various hydraulic pistons, and an unknown lubricant seeped into the transmission rods and bearings. The wishing spell has been completed. Hurry up. As a spell-like user, Barasa immediately ascertained that benediction had taken effect. He immediately wanted to ask Quest to release himself, even if he had to pause the ticking countdown in his mind. Unfortunately, Keyes had not made any promises before. The young blue dragon waved his hand, and the pit fiend left the command room that was occupied by the huge engine, heading to a more spacious area outside. Then, the clockwork megalosaurus that had been stuffed into Baylor's brain in the form of a small music box suddenly transformed. The small metal music box spun rapidly, pieces of metal changing their shape as they spun, rapidly expanding into the shape of the clockwork megalosaurus. The pit fiend's brain was instantly ground into a pile of mush. The great devil did not even have the chance to grunt before he lost his life. His eyes bulged, and yellow and white liquid flowed out of his face. Mr. Snader, Keyes immediately obtained the pit fiend's general flag the moment he died. He immediately ordered the Demolic, bring some people to take over this guy's army. We'll set off tomorrow. Shortly after, the young blue dragon teleported back to the command room. He could not wait to start the engine so that his traction city could move. Fill the black oil. Keyes sat on the control panel, picking up a brass pipe to communicate with the Gorarms in charge of guarding the black oil warehouse. The Gorarms opened the lids of barrels of refined black oil, pouring it into the pipes that had been set up long ago. It flowed towards the engine's combustion chamber, acting as fuel to support the engine's operation. Looking at the various scales on the dashboard in front of him, Quess reached out his hand and grasped a handle with a metal sphere. Crackling electric arcs appeared in the combustion chamber. The black oil that had been compressed and turned into oil mist was ignited in an instant. The expanding gas pushed the pistons, using the transmission rods to convert the chemical energy into kinetic energy. Listening to the rumbling of the engine, Keyes carefully checked the various instruments, hoping that nothing out of the ordinary would happen. That was the only way he could proceed with his plans. He had to bring his city to outrun the poison. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.